Chapter 973. It was already the 3rd month of the 5th year of Jing He. In the 3rd month of spring, the grass was long and the orioles were flying. It was the season of recovery. The green willows in the hibiscus garden had already sprouted new buds, and the apricot forest was filled with a delicate fragrance. The blue water rippled in the breeze, and a girl's voice was crisp and sweet. "Sir, come and see, I caught a big fish." Li Yi walked over and helped Xiaofan take the fish off the hook. At the age of 14, the girl's face had lost most of its immaturity. When she raised her head and smiled, it seemed that the spring scenery in the garden was a lot brighter. A guard took the fat fish, skillfully cut open its belly, removed the scales, and handed it to Prince Jean Li Han, who was next to the grill. Li Han, who was close to 13 years old and could roast fish well, was already the official dean of the academy. His originally chubby face had started to become more angular. At this time, it had been more than half a month since Li Xian ascended the throne at the beginning of March. The former emperor, Ran Zong, died at the beginning of the year. Jing He's reign ended in the 5th year, but to establish a new era, it would have to wait until next year. Just like the late spring, in the 3rd month of spring, the capital and even the entire Jing kingdom began to exude vitality. The court was running steadily, the people lived and worked in peace and contentment, the public security was good, and the economy was booming. Of course, these had nothing to do with the unreliable emperor. Li Xian was using a microscope to observe the microorganisms in the lake. Things made with glass were no longer much of a challenge for the Academy of Sciences. They had already made presbyopic glasses, which could be said to be a blessing for some old ministers in the court. It was said that after an old imperial censor's presbyopia was cured, he didn't say a word about Li Xian wanting to increase research funds for the Academy of Sciences. Li Xian, the bastard emperor, was so lazy that when he presided over the funeral of the late emperor, he entrusted all the affairs of the court to his assistant, Emingzu. After he ascended to the throne, he seemed to have completely forgotten about this matter. At first, he did not forget to attend the court every day, but he only persisted for 10 days before handing over all the affairs of the court to Emingzu with the excuse that he was busy with his research. The officials had nothing to say. After going through so many things, they understood that the Jing kingdom could not live without a princess, nor could it live without His Majesty. Such an arrangement seemed absurd, but it was the most suitable one. Li Yi held Yongning's hand and walked towards the lawn with Xiaofan by his side. 2 small figures walked and crawled on the lawn. Occasionally, they would lose their balance and fall. Rui and Crown Princess. Now they should be called the Empress. Rui and the Empress had told the maids and guards around them to let them play by themselves. After falling and beating, the bodies of the children, who were almost 1.5 years old, would become stronger. From the 4th year to the 5th year of Jing He, among the officials and nobles in the capital, the Wang family was undoubtedly the biggest winner. In the beginning, many people thought that the Wang family was destroying the foundation of the family by marrying the crown prince instead of the king of Shu, who was favored by the officials. Now, those people had to rely on the Wang family to survive. They had the most powerful financial resources in the Jing kingdom, and were backed by the most powerful forces in the Jing kingdom. Who could compete with the Wang family? If there was only one family. In terms of financial resources, ordinary people would naturally think of the god of wealth's family in the Jing kingdom. However, a small number of people knew that the Li family's financial resources were not far from the Wang family's, or even surpassed it. In terms of power, although the Wang family had the empress, they still couldn't compare with the favored officials of the 2 dynasties. The Wang family didn't need to compare either, because the Wang family and the Li family had a special relationship. Yongning and Xiaofan ran to play with Li Duan and Li Rui. Li Yi walked to Rui and Wang Qin and bowed slightly. "Greetings, Your Highness." Wang Qin smiled and said, "Sister Rui and I are like sisters. County Marquis Li, you don't have to be so polite." Although Li Xian was the emperor, there was only one empress in the harem. Many officials in the court had repeatedly written to him, asking him to appoint concubines, but to no avail. This was also the reason why the Wang family's position in the court was becoming more and more stable. If the emperor didn't appoint a new concubine, there was no suspense about who would be the next emperor. Li Han came over with a plate and said, "Sir, the fish is grilled. I didn't put too much seasoning on it." Li Han's grilling technique had been unanimously approved by everyone, so Prince Jean was also a part-time grill hand in addition to being the dean of the academy. Rui liked to eat lightly flavored food, so Li Yi asked him to put less seasoning. The empress' taste should be similar. She didn't have many friends in the palace, so she often called Rui to the palace. Li Xian later directly moved his family to Furong Garden. Anyway, there were only 2 people in his family. This place wasn't far from the Li family, so he and Rui often visited each other. Ladies first. There were many fish bones in the lake. Li Yi used chopsticks to pick out the bones, then handed the plate to Rui and walked towards Li Xian by the lake. Wang Qin sighed softly and said, "When father was alive, his favorite people were my husband, Emingzu, and County Marquis Li. Father's death was a great blow to them," Rui smiled and said. "My husband often said that death is not the end. Maybe the former emperor just went to another world. The former emperor was the emperor, a dragon among men. Even in another world, he could live very well. I believe that His Majesty and Her Royal Highness also think so. You have an undeserved reputation as the Dean of the Academy of Mathematics. All the matters of the Academy are done by Xiaofan. It's just a title, and there's no need to trouble you. Why do you want to resign?" Li Xian withdrew his gaze from the microscope and looked at him. Opportunities should always be left to young people. Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Xiaofan has been coveting that position for a long time. As a teacher, I naturally have to fulfill his wish." Li Xian did not continue this topic. He thought of something and suddenly said, "I almost forgot that you are only a county marquis now. How about I make you a county magistrate?" "Forget it, how about a duke?" Since the founding of the country, no duke had been conferred, not even a county magistrate. His title of county marquis had been an exception for decades. Li Yi looked at Li Xian and asked, "Why don't you make me a prince?" "You want to be a prince?" Li Xian thought for a while and said, "If you want to be a prince, I'll write an edict when I go back." If Li Xian really issued this edict, there might be a courtier who would kill himself tomorrow. For the sake of his own reputation, Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Forget it. A county marquis is good. His Majesty is gone, and there's no point in being a duke or a prince." He looked at Li Xian and said, "You can't throw all the matters of court politics to Mingzhu. You are the emperor and you are also a man. Can't you act like a man and shoulder the responsibilities you should bear?" Li Xian looked at him and asked, "What's wrong? Do you feel sorry for her?" "If you feel sorry for her, you can help her yourself." Li Xian glanced at him and said, "You and Mingzhu can solve any problem if you work together." Li Yi took a deep breath and asked, "Are you the emperor or am I the emperor?" Li Xian asked back, "Do you like Mingzhu or do I like Mingzhu?" Li Yi was defeated again. "However, you are right about one thing." Li Xian thought for a while and suddenly said, "Since you are a man, you should bear the responsibility that a man should have." Li Yi nodded. This guy was somewhat responsible. Li Xian looked in a certain direction and murmured, "Little Han is already 13 years old. In another 2 years, he will be a man, right?" Somewhere by the lake, Li Han, who was roasting fish, suddenly had goosebumps and his body couldn't help but tremble. Chapter 974. In a feudal society where imperial power was supreme, the throne was the most dignified and supreme thing. Li Xian's way of thinking, which was like kicking the throne around like a ball, was very different from the ancient people. Li Yi felt deeply guilty. Thinking about how Li Yi was obsessed with mental arithmetic and was exactly the same as him, as his teacher, Li Yi felt that his sins were even deeper. Li Xian was still young, and his thoughts were too idealistic and unrealistic. In 2 years, he would understand that the throne wasn't something he could give up just because he wanted to, and he could give it to whoever he wanted. Li Han could be a good head of the arithmetic academy, and he could be a cook, but it was unlikely that he could be a good emperor. At least, this was what Li Yi thought when he ate the fish he roasted. After handing over the fish with the bones removed to Yongning and Shaning, Li Han walked over and looked at Li Xian in the distance. He asked hesitantly, "Teacher, what were you talking about with my brother?" Li Yi picked up a piece of fish and asked, "What's wrong?" Li Han shook his head and said, "Nothing. It's just that I have a bad feeling." Children nowadays had a strong desire to live. Li Yi looked at him and shook his head, saying, "We didn't talk about much. Don't think too much, go roast another fish." Furong Garden had a quiet environment and pleasant scenery. Other than Xujiang Gardens, it was one of the 2 most beautiful imperial gardens in the capital. The Li family wasn't far from these 2 places. When he and Rui went home, they didn't even need to take a carriage. Li Yi carried the already asleep Li Duan. Rui tilted her head and looked at him, asking, "Husband, do you feel that Duaner really likes Xiao Rui?" Such a young child actually didn't know whether he liked or not. It was just that the two children had played together for a long time and were used to it. If it was a kitten or a puppy, he would still like it. Li Yi looked at her and asked, "Did Her Majesty and Yangzi say something?" Rui smiled and nodded. She said that Duaner and Xiao Rui were born on the same day. It's fate from their previous lives. If they can grow up together like this, they can be considered childhood sweethearts. Why don't we settle the marriage now? Because of his own experience, Li Yi abhorred things like arranged marriages or child betrothal. He shook his head and said, "Their affairs will depend on themselves in the future. We'd better not interfere too much." Rui obviously liked Xiao Rui very much. She thought for a moment and said, "But Xiao Rui is a princess. When the time comes, many people will want to marry into the royal family. If the Duaner likes her and she is betrothed to someone else, then let's snatch." Li Yi said without hesitation, "My wife is the best at snatching people." Rui took Li Duan from his arms and said lightly, "I have something to discuss with Sister Zemo. Husband, sleep in the study tonight." Li Yi shook his head and said, "Don't. If there's anything to discuss, let's go together." Rui looked at him and asked, "Sister Zuemo and I are going to discuss all night. Does husband want to join us?" "If you don't mind." Li Yi looked at the smile on Rui's face, waved his hand, and said, "Forget it. That bed is too small for 3 people." He had originally planned to marry Zuemo at the beginning of the year, but because of the death of the former emperor, he could only postpone the date. Now, although a month had passed, there was no auspicious date in a short period of time. Of course, the more important reason was that he thought that the time between the two events was too short, and he felt uneasy. He was gratified that Zuemo could understand this and even comforted him. How lucky he was in this life to be able to meet these women. Thinking about it, this might also be God's compensation for his previous life. After all, he went to the library with the intention of learning. Not only did he meet a psychopath who returned kindness with ingratitude, but he also encountered an incredible fire. God owed him too much. At the gate of the Li mansion, Li Yi unexpectedly saw a person. The gatekeeper of the Li family said politely to a young man, "Sir, my master and madam have gone out. I don't know when they will be back. Why don't you come again tomorrow, or wait in the mansion?" The young man cupped his hands and said, "In that case, I will come again another day." "No need for another day." Li Yi walked over, patted Jiang Zian on the shoulder, and said with a smile, "Brother Jiang, what's the matter? Let's talk inside." The expression on Jiang Zian's face immediately became respectful. "Lord Li." In the mansion, the maid served good tea. Li Yi looked at Jiang Zian and asked with a smile, "Brother Zian should be leaving soon, right?" "Yes, the appointment from the Ministry of Personnel has been issued. I will leave tomorrow." Jiang Zian nodded and suddenly stood up. He bowed deeply to Li Yi and said, "Jiang Zian thanks Lord Li for saving my life." His former friend had almost pushed him into the abyss. His former enemy had not only saved him from prison, but had also given him a bright career. At this moment, standing in front of Li Yi, his heart was in turmoil, and he could not control himself. Li Yi stood up and helped him up. He said, "Brother Jiang, please be careful on this trip to Qing'an Prefecture. Anxi County is also your hometown. You must govern it well in the future. Don't let your people down." Jiang Zian's expression was solemn. He bowed and said, "Zian will not let Lord Li down." Li Yi smiled and said, "You don't have to be so polite. Sit." After Jiang Zian sat down, he cupped his hands again and said, "I have offended you in the past. Lord Li, please forgive me." I. Don't mention the past." Li Yi waved his hand and said, "How can there be no wine when old friends gather? Servants, bring wine." The Li family's cooks were very fast. In a quarter of an hour, a jar of wine and a few dishes were served. Li Yi had once made up his mind to never drink again, but he did not persist for long. During this time, he had failed to compete with Mississippi Liu and Demingzu in terms of drinking, but his tolerance for alcohol had greatly improved. Jiang Zian was very restrained at first, but after a few cups of wine, he gradually became intoxicated. "Lord Li, Brother Li, do you really think of me as a friend?" "Of course. I, Li Yi, don't have many friends. You, Jiang Zian, are one of them." Don't forget, we are friends who have been through life and death together. Since we are friends, there are some things that I have to say. Jiang Ziyan's eyes were hazy from the alcohol. He looked at him discontentedly and said, Miss Ruoqing is such a good woman. Even if she is the empress, don't you want to find her? You scolded those Jinsher in Prince Ning Mansion, where is your courage? Li Yi slapped him on the head and scolded. At this time, you still dare to think about my Ruoqing? I don't think about her. Jiang Ziyan's face turned red. He stared at him and said, I just feel that what you did was not like a man. I am not like a man. Li Yi looked at Jiang Ziyan and took the woman who was pouring wine for him into his arms. He said, Ruoqing, tell him, do I look like a man? Jiang Ziyan was shocked. Ah, you are Miss Ruoqing. At the door, hearing the man's hearty laughter coming from the room, drunken Mo lowered her head, and a trace of sadness appeared in her eyes. Although he was laughing, it did not mean that he was really happy. If he was really happy, he would not have to drink. If he was not happy, it would be difficult for her to smile. Rui walked to her side, glanced into the room and whispered, After the former emperor left, my husband did not have many enemies, nor did he have many friends. He once said that after the former emperor left, no one could shelter them from the wind and rain. Drunken Mo looked at the figure in the room and shook her head. Now in the capital, who can set off a storm? They respect him, fear him and fear him. He actually does not like this. Rui took her hand and shook her head. There is only one side of my husband that we do not understand. Jiang Ziyan was soon drunk and was helped to the guest room by the servants of the Li family to rest. Li Yi leaned against the chair and rested for a moment. When he opened his eyes, he saw an old face full of wrinkles. Since the death of the emperor, he had not seen this old face for a long time. Chapter 975. After the death of the previous emperor, Changde had gone to the mausoleum to guard it. There was still a long way to go before the one-year deadline. Seeing him here, other than pleasant surprise, Li Yi was also surprised. Chang, why have you come out? He asked in surprise. He then waved his hand and poured a cup of wine for him. Don't say anything else. It's not easy to see each other, let's drink. Changde's old face remained expressionless. He didn't touch the wine cup. Lightly, he said, The emperor can't see the world anymore, so I came out to see for the emperor. I say, can you not always put on that dead face? Li Yi handed the wine cup to his hand and said with some dissatisfaction, If you have nothing to do, smile more. Smiling can extend your life by 5 seconds. You're already so old, shouldn't you be more careful? Changde opened his mouth and asked, Should I smile like this? Li Yi looked at his smile and paused. He then shook his head and said, Never mind, it's best if you don't smile. Changde picked up the wine jar and took a big gulp before saying, It's all thanks to you that the emperor was able to last these years. If it weren't for you, the emperor would not have been able to let go of the world before he died. Li Yi waved his hand. There's no need to say such things. Changde put down the wine jar and looked at him. What plans do you have for the future? What plans? Li Yi thought for a bit and then shook his head. I don't know. What about you? In a year, will you still return to the court? Very few people knew that Changde was not only the head of the internal surveillance but also the true leader of the Secret Intelligence Bureau. He had single-handedly established the Secret Intelligence Bureau. He was a knife in the hands of the previous 2 emperors, a sharp blade hanging over the heads of the officials and nobles in Jingdo. Didn't you say that opportunities are for the young? Changde looked at him and shook his head. Even you are not a young man, so why should this old man occupy this position and not leave? The previous emperor entrusted His Majesty to me, and now that His Majesty has left, this old man's mission is complete. Li Yi lowered his head and drank without saying a word. The departure of the former emperor not only represented the replacement of the old and the new dynasties, but it was also a turning point for him, for Changde, for Li Xian, for Emingzu, and for some others. Once one's position changed, one's former friends and enemies would no longer be the same. Changde raised his head and took another gulp. Suddenly, he said, Before His Majesty left, he asked me to pass a few words to you. What did His Majesty say? Li Yi looked up at him. Changde narrowed his eyes and said, His Majesty wants me to tell you that if you betray Emingzu, he won't let you off even if he's in the underworld or in another world. Li Yi's expression didn't change as he asked, What else? When you leave, take Yongning with you. She can't live without you. Li Yi nodded. These were two souls that were connected to each other. Not only could Yongning not live without him, he could not live without Yongning either. He looked at Changda and continued to ask, anything else? Don't hurt Xiaoning. She's still a child who doesn't understand anything. Changda put down his wine cup and said, when she truly understands these things, let her make her own decision. Li Yi looked at him and asked, understand what? Changda shook his head and said, I'm just passing on His Majesty's words to you. Li Yi thought about it and nodded. Okay. After the death of the former emperor, Chief Eunuch Changda guarded the imperial mausoleum for a year. During this year, he didn't leave the mausoleum at all. As someone who had followed the former emperor his entire life, no one understood the former emperor better than him, and no one knew what he wanted to do better than him. When he saw Changda out of the Li residence, he ran into the slovenly old man. After getting to know the slovenly old man, Li Yi understood that reaching the peak in any field was not by chance, but by necessity. Before getting to know the slovenly old man, the most diligent person he had seen was Yang Liuqing, followed by Mississippi Lu. After getting to know the slovenly old man, Li Yi finally understood how he had reached the Grandmaster realm. He was already so old, but he was still working so hard. If he didn't become a Grandmaster, there would be no justice in this world. However, being a master was lonely. As a Grandmaster, only Grandmasters could be his opponent. Rui was a Grandmaster, but she wouldn't spar with the slovenly old man. Taoist Nun was also a Grandmaster, but she was thousands of miles away. There were also Grandmasters nearby. Li Yi still didn't know what realm second great uncle was at, but he was definitely strong enough to be a match for the slovenly old man. Unfortunately, he wasn't so lonely in front of second great uncle. Of course, the closest Grandmaster was Old Man Chong in front of him. The two were about the same age, and their realms were similar. They were indeed excellent opponents. The slovenly old man walked past them, paused, and quickly walked back, looking at Changda. At this moment, Li Yi actually saw some kind of inexplicable light in his eyes. Fight. The slovenly old man looked at Changda and suddenly said. Old Man Chong maintained his usual aloof manner, glanced at him indifferently, and walked out of the door. The slovenly old man smiled disdainfully. You don't dare? This kind of clumsy provocation naturally had no effect on Old Man Chong, who was familiar with all kinds of tricks in the palace. Changda's footsteps were very steady, and he was about to step out of the door. The slovenly old man said angrily, You sly old man, has the courage of a Grandmaster been eaten by a dog? Changda paused, but the next moment, he still walked out of the door without hesitation. The slovenly old man thought for a moment and said calmly, You don't have a dick. Li Yi suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. Then, he heard a familiar, cold voice. Since you want to die, I'll fulfill your wish. He ran inside, shouting as he ran, Rui, Rui, come out and watch the show. Mississippi Lu was in the room, writing at the desk. She was probably dealing with Lu Meng's matter. The current her was becoming more and more like a qualified chief of Wulin. What's the matter? She looked up at Li Yi, who had suddenly barged in, and asked. There's no time to explain. Let's go out first. Li Yi grabbed her arm and ran outside. A battle between Grandmasters was not something that could be seen every day, especially when Grandmasters fought with their lives on the line. Mississippi Lu was only one step away from this realm. After watching it, she might have some feelings. There was no need for Li Yi to explain at all. Mississippi Lu was pulled out of the door by him. When she saw the two vague figures outside, she had already stopped and could not look away. Li Yi only saw two shadows and could not help but ask curiously, How is it? Who has the upper hand now? Don't talk. Mississippi Lu reached out to cover his mouth. Li Yi moved her hand away and smelled a familiar fragrance. He spat a few times, and then looked at the field again. Old Man Chong might really be fighting with his life this time. He fought from the ground to the top of the wall, from the top of the wall to the sky, and finally from the sky to the ground. Li Yi could not see their moves clearly. After about a quarter of an hour, there was a loud bang. The two figures separated and stood on one side of the wall. It felt like the battle between Shimin Chueshue and Yi Guqing. Awesome. I haven't fought so happily for a long time. The sloppy old man laughed and said, I can't beat you and you can't beat me. Let's call it a draw today. Let's fight another day. What do you think? Changda's fists, which were hidden in his sleeves, trembled slightly. He looked at him coldly and jumped off the wall. Without saying anything, he turned around and left. Seeing him leave, an unnatural flush appeared on the sloppy old man's face. He jumped down from the top of the wall and muttered, "This old thing is worthy of being from the palace. If it wasn't for the fact that he has made some progress these days, he would have lost face today." Mississippi Lou stood where she was, deep in thought. Li Yi looked at her, walked to the sloppy old man, and asked, "Sue, how difficult is it to break through the bottleneck of supreme power? Do you have any experience?" "It's difficult, but it's not difficult either." The sloppy old man looked back at Mississippi Lou and said, "Some people find it difficult in their bodies, while others find it difficult in their hearts. Let go of your obsession and worries, and only then can you pass the barrier of your heart." After saying that, he strode inside. Li Yi followed closely and asked curiously, "What do you mean?" "Those who should understand will understand as soon as they hear it, and it's useless for those who shouldn't understand to say it." The sloppy old man smiled and said, "Whether or not your clan's second miss and that little princess can take that step in this lifetime will depend on whether or not they can overcome the barrier of their hearts. What stubbornness, worry, or lack thereof?" Instead of advising others to practice diligently, what idealism was this? Li Yi looked at the sloppy old man and suddenly asked, "So, Elder Su has also once let go of his stubbornness and worries?" The sloppy old man stopped, and a complicated expression appeared on his face, but he did not answer. Li Yi thought for a moment and said, "I have one last question." "Yes." The sloppy old man's figure disappeared, leaving only a long sigh. Chapter 976. Who do you love? Li Yi looked at the empty courtyard and asked in confusion. He just wanted to ask the sloppy old man what his chances of becoming a grandmaster were. After all, if Rui and Emingzu were blocked at the door of grandmaster status and couldn't take that step, he still had a chance to catch up and restore his manhood. Who did he say he loved? Changda? He had heard of friendship forged by fighting, but he had never heard of gay love forged by fighting. Could it be that the two of them had fallen in love with each other and developed into a gay relationship? Hearing a voice coming from behind, Li Yi looked back and saw the old woman standing at the door looking at him. "Come in with me for a moment." The old woman turned and walked into the room. Li Yi didn't hesitate and followed. The old woman had always been very concerned about the Li family. This time, she had set the date and written all the invitations. All she had to do was wait to send them out, but it was a national funeral. She felt a bit regretful. After the 1-month deadline, she mentioned it to him twice in a vague way, but he deliberately avoided it. It seemed that he couldn't wait any longer. The old woman put away the wine jars in the room and said, "The previous emperor treated you and the Li family well when he was alive. You should be grieving when the previous emperor passed away. But the dead are gone, and the living must live on well. You still have Rui, Zumo, and Dwainer. You shouldn't be overly sad." Li Yi smiled and nodded. "I know." In the beginning, his mood was indeed gloomy for a long time. That was because ever since they first met in Qing and Fu, there had been no relationship between the ruler and his official. They were ruler and official, and they were also friends. Even though he had always been mentally prepared, when the day really came, it was still difficult to accept. But just as the old woman said, the dead were gone, and the living must live well. Being overly immersed in the sorrow of the past was irresponsible for the future and the performance of a coward. "His Majesty didn't come today?" The old mistress nodded slightly and suddenly asked. As an emperor, Li Xian did not attend to his duties. Every day, he would visit the Li family. Occasionally, it would be Li Yi and Rui. Li Yi explained to the old mistress, "He didn't come today. Rui and I just came back from Lotus Garden." Madame Dowager looked at him and asked, "You and His Majesty have known each other for 4 years, right?" Li Yi thought about it and said, "Less than 4 years. He and Li Xian first met in July of the 1st year of Jing He. Now it was March of the 5th year of Jing He. There were still 4 months until the 4th year. 4 years is not a short time." The old mistress sighed and said, "It is the Li family's fortune to be favored by 2 emperors. But you must remember that His Majesty is His Majesty. He is no longer the Crown Prince Li Xian of the past. It was said that being in the emperor's company was like living with a tiger. Since ancient times, there had been countless cases of good bows being hidden after the birds had been killed. It seemed that emperors were supposed to be cold and heartless. Most people, including the old mistress, thought so too. But none of the emperors that Li Yi knew were like this. The previous emperor was benevolent, not only toward the court but also toward people. After Li Xian became emperor, his temperament did not change at all. He was not a qualified emperor. He was straightforward and free. The things that the old mistress worried about would not happen, at least for the time being. But even though he believed in Li Xian, others did not. Since ancient times, heaven, earth, emperor, and teacher have to respect etiquette and ethics. The old mistress looked at him and sighed again. She said, "I know that you and His Majesty are close friends, but people's hearts change. For the sake of the Li family, you must be more careful and not fall too deeply into it." Li Yi thought for a long time and then lowered his head. He said, "Grandson will remember. I still envy you. You only have the title of Golden Ziguang Doctor." Li Xian put his hands behind his head as he lay on the rocking chair. Looking at the sky, he murmured, "Beautiful wives and concubines, no worldly affairs, free and unfettered. What more can a husband ask for in life?" "You want to take concubines?" Li Yi sat by the stone table and looked at him. He said, "If you want to do it, then do it. Your harem is so empty. It should be enriched." Li Xian looked back. The two women should be in the room. Only then did he relax. He said, "We are not the same. I only need Qin Li Yi suddenly asked, "How is your brother Shen?" "Brother Shen." Li Xian thought for a moment and said, "He has already graduated from the Mathematics Institute. I feel that he is more suitable for our Academy of Sciences. I don't know where the Ministry of Appointments will send him, so I am preparing to headhunt him." Then he felt that something was wrong. He looked at Li Yi and said, "Don't try to change the topic. I, the Emperor, am not as free as you, the Marquis. This is too unreasonable." Li Xian was clearly brooding over this matter. He hesitated for a moment and said, "Prime Minister Qin has already resigned 3 times and I persuaded him to come back. The Qin family has suffered such a great change. Prime Minister Qin is disheartened and his health is not as good as before. If he has made up his mind, I will allow him to retire. After Prime Minister Qin's resignation, the position of the right minister will be vacant. Only you can take this position. At that time, you and Emingzu will be in cahoots." Li Yi pointed at Li Xian, looked behind him and said, "He is cursing you." Emingzu had just finished sparring with Rui. Her hair was wet. Li Xian jumped up from the chair and said, "I am going to see Xiao Rui." Mingzhu was a noble princess, and always had a heroic spirit that did not lose to any man. This heroic spirit was something that even the Lu second young miss did not have. In other words, even Mississippi Lu was more feminine than Emingzu. Of course, these words could not be said in front of him. Otherwise, he might be greeted with a beating from both women. However, when she took a bath and put up her wet hair in front of him, Li Yi felt that his understanding of her was not complete. At this time, Her Royal Highness still had a little bit of femininity. After putting up her hair, she looked at Li Yi and said in surprise, "Why are you looking at me? Is there something on my face?" Li Yi shook his head repeatedly. "No." She did not continue this topic and asked, "Did Chief Chong come to see you 2 days ago?" Li Yi was puzzled. "He did not return to the palace?" Emingzu shook her head and said, "He only came here to take a look around the capital and then returned to the mausoleum." Li Yi explained, "His Majesty had a few words for him to bring to me." "Father?" Although her and Li Xian's identity had been announced, she was still used to calling the former emperor this way. Li Yi nodded. Emingzu looked at her, thought for a moment and asked, "What did father say?" She shouldn't have asked this question, but she wanted to know anything about her father. Li Yi thought for a moment and said, "His Majesty asked me to take care of you and Li Xian." Emingzu looked at him and said, "Father already said this the other night." Li Yi was speechless for a moment. He could not tell her that her father told him not to let her down in the future, and that when she did not want to be the empress, they could make do with each other. His Majesty also said that Shaoning is only a child now. When she grows up, she can make her own decisions. Emingzu looked at him and asked in confusion, "What does that mean?" "Yes, sir, what does that mean?" The girl ran out of the room, thought for a moment and said with some dissatisfaction, I am already 14 years old, I am not a child anymore. Li Yi patted her head and said, when will you stop saying that you're not a child anymore? You're not a child anymore, the dizzy girl nodded and said, when that time comes, will I be able to make my own decisions? Li Yi nodded, this is your father's verbal order, it is the same as an imperial edict. I knew father treats me the best. The girl smiled excitedly and her eyes flashed. She murmured, can I make my own decisions? I will ask Brother Xian to write an imperial edict when I go back. Chapter 977. What are you thinking about? Li Yi flicked his finger on her forehead and said, this imperial edict will only count when you grow up. Among the girls, Duanwu was the most obedient, Yongning was the most adorable, and Shaoning was the most mischievous one. She had countless ideas and no one knew what she was thinking in her little head. That's what I said. Shaoning covered her forehead and ran away with a chuckle. Soon, she ran back and asked, then how old is considered to be grown up? Li Yi rubbed her hair and said, you will know when you grow up. After Shaoning ran away, Li Yi thought of what just happened and turned to Emingzu and said, Li Xian doesn't think before doing things. You should suppress him. You mean the position of the right minister? Emingzu thought about it and said, but I think this position is quite suitable for you. Don't you want to be in cahoots with me? Cahoots? Li Yi shook his head and asked, who's the wolf and who's the bay? Emingzu thought about it and said, I think it's the bay. I like to be in the top. Since the death of the former emperor at the beginning of the year, the court was generally peaceful. It wasn't until April that there was another disturbance. Prime Minister Qin resigned many times. After the emperor agreed, he was conferred the title of special minister. This was also a non-official who didn't directly participate in the court affairs. His position was even higher than the Minister of Honor. He had the right to attend the court meetings and greet the Prime Minister. The left and right ministers were the two towering pillars of the court. Now that one of them had fallen, it was natural to build another one. In recent years, the court of the Jing Kingdom was becoming younger. There weren't many senior officials like Prime Minister Qin and Prime Minister Shen left. Because of their old age, they weren't suitable for the position. A country could live without a ruler, but it couldn't live without a prime minister. In the court meeting at the beginning of April, the ownership of the right minister's position was naturally the most important. The imperial court tended to be younger, but it was not to the extent that there was a gap between the old and the young. The Wang family, the Shen family, and a limited number of officials with experience and ability could all be choices. There was no need to consider the Shen family. In the imperial court, it was impossible for the left and right ministers to come from the Shen family. The Shen family would not participate and the officials would not agree. The other officials were at a disadvantage in the struggle for the position of prime minister, either because they did not have enough experience or because they did not have enough background. On the surface, the Wang family had the greatest hope. Because of the empress, the officials were almost certain that the Wang family would rise to a higher level this time. The more you don't want it, I still have to give it to you. Li Yi thought for a moment and said, since it has come to this, in fact, what I said just now was all a lie. As a scholar, who doesn't want to become a general and become a prime minister? I refused because I know that the more I don't want it, the more you want to give it to me. This is the simplest way to advance by retreating. Do you understand? Li Xian looked at him and frowned. So, you also want to be the prime minister? Li Yi nodded solemnly and said, now that it has come to this, I won't hide it from you. I really want to be the prime minister. If you want to be the prime minister, you should have said so earlier. Li Xian slapped his thigh and said, if you had said so earlier, I would have agreed when Prime Minister Qin resigned for the first time. I was afraid that you wouldn't be happy. Now, I will issue the decree in the morning court tomorrow. One must abide by the rules. Those who don't play by the rules should be struck by lightning. Young master, old Lu is here. Just when Li Yi was wondering why he became so despicable after becoming the emperor, Feng came in with County Magistrate Lu. Lu Daiyou could be said to be the epitome of the saying, one never comes to a temple without a cause. Every time he came, there must be something big. And it was something bad. Therefore, Feng privately called him a jinx. Lu Daiyou greets your majesty. Lu Daiyou first bowed to Li Xian respectfully before turning around and bowing. Lord Li. Li Yi looked at him and asked, Lord Lu, could it be that something big has happened this time? Lu Dao shook his head and said, It's nothing big. It's just that two young men were jealous of a girl in a brothel and tore down a brothel. Both of them were slightly injured and are now being detained by the county government. There was no need for Lu Da to make a trip here just to tell him about the fight between the two playboys. Li Yi thought for a moment and asked, I'm guessing that one of the young men should be surnamed Li, right? Lu Dao nodded and said, One of them is Li Yingjie, the eldest son of Assistant Minister Li of the Ministry of Personnel. What about the other one? The other one is surnamed Wang. Li Yingjie was the son of his second uncle, Li Mingzi, who was about the same age as him. Li Yi had seen him many times but had never talked to him much. Madame Dowager often mentioned him, saying that he had changed his previous playboy character, which was very rare. Not to mention that his father was an assistant minister of the Ministry of Personnel who was on the rise in his career. There were not many people in the capital who would take the initiative to provoke him just because of his surname. Lu Dao's arrival had explained everything. Li Yi stood up and said, Let's go and have a look. Chapter 978. There were many powerful officials at the feet of the emperor in the capital, and there were countless hedonistic sons. Their families all had a lot of background, and they were young and vigorous. Almost every month, as the capital magistrate, Lu Dao would handle a few such cases. These cases were not difficult, but they were also difficult. Those influential families were very prideful. Often, the two families involved would settle it in private without going through the county government. If there was no private settlement, he could judge the case impartially. The current county government was no longer what it used to be. As long as they upheld the word reason, there was no need to fear any so-called rich families. However, the situation this time was different. The Wang family could be said to be the most powerful family in the capital. Although the Li family of the Ministry of Personnel was not as powerful as the Wang family, it was supported by a bigger tree. Moreover, the Wang family and the Li family had a good relationship. As an outsider, it was better for him not to interfere. Li Yi had listened to the county magistrate's detailed explanation on the way here. It was nothing more than a fight between two young people. From verbal conflict to physical conflict, it developed into a chaotic fight. In the process, the brothel was smashed, which attracted the attention of the county government. When Li Yi and Li Xian walked into the county government, the two families were already there. It was not appropriate for the elders to interfere in the affairs of the younger generation. The Li family sent the current housekeeper. Li Yi also knew the Wang family. It was the next head of the Wang family, Wang Yong. These days, he had been repeatedly pushed to the front by the Wang family. It seemed that the position of the head of the family was already stable. Wang Yong naturally knew Li Xian. He hurriedly stood up and said respectfully, Wang Yong greets Your Majesty. Your Majesty. As soon as his words came out, the people present all knelt down. Li Xian waved his hand and said, I just came to take a look. Get up, the case should be solved as it should be. Wang Yong nodded his head respectfully before turning to look at Li Yi. With an apologetic look on his face, he said, Brother Li, I've caused trouble for you today. Wang Jian is the son of my second uncle, and he doesn't know the immensity of the heavens and earth. When I return, I'll definitely get my second uncle to discipline him more strictly. As for the damage to the brothel, the Wang family will definitely compensate for it. Li Yi waved his hand and said, Brother Wang, you don't have to be like this. It's normal to be young and impetuous. You and I have experienced this before. I've already asked County Magistrate Lu about it. Both of them are at fault. How can Wang Jiachuan bear the loss of the brothel? As for the apology, don't mention it again. Wang Yong knew his personality very well, so he didn't say anything. He nodded, then turned around, his face darkening. Hurry up and apologize. The authority of the substitute clan head was still very useful. A young man with messy clothes bowed to the person opposite him and said, I'm sorry. The other person also bowed in apology. The junior of the Wang family was quickly brought back by the servants of the Wang family. Li Yingjie was also taken away by the steward of the mansion. It was originally a conflict between the younger generation of the two families, so no one would care. Wang Yong turned around and said with a smile, A few days ago, my father said that he hasn't seen Brother Li for a long time. The tea that the Li family sent during the New Year festival is almost finished. Li Yi smiled and said. If Lord Wang likes it, I'll have someone send some more another day. No need for another day. Li Xian waved his hand and said. It just so happens that Qin Er is at the Wang family these days, and I haven't been to the Wang family for a long time. How about today? Wang family. The young man rubbed the bruise on his face and said with a displeased expression. Big brother, why do you want me to apologize? It's not like I'm the only one in the wrong. A middle-aged man said with a sullen expression. Who told you to have a conflict with the Li family? The young man's expression became even more unconvinced. So what if it's the Li family? Does the Wang family have to be afraid of the Li family? The empress's surname is Wang, and the Wang family is also a century-old clan. Other than Li Yi, what else does the Li family have? Why do we have to be afraid of him? Shut up. The Wang family master, who had been silent all this time, glared at him and said in a low voice. You unfilial son. What are you saying? The middle-aged man walked forward, raised his hand, and shook it helplessly. Is this something you can say? It is. The young man curled his lips and said. He is so young, yet he has so much power. Now, he even has to fight with eldest uncle for the position of prime minister. Since ancient times, people with such power have always been feared by the emperor in the end. No one has had a good ending. Now, the officials are very afraid of him. The emperor can't tolerate him for too long. If he knows what's good for him, he should retire early. Otherwise, I want to see what will happen to him in the end. Shut up. A harsh voice resounded in everyone's ears, but it didn't come from anyone in the hall. Wang Yong walked in from outside. The young man opened his mouth and wanted to say something, but Wang Yong picked up the chair beside him and smashed it on the young man's head. The chair broke into pieces in an instant, which showed how much force Wang Yong used. The young man fell to the ground with a swollen face and a bloody nose, but he didn't faint. He looked at Wang Yong in disbelief and murmured, You haven't said enough? Wang Yong glanced at him. When he picked up the second chair, everyone in the hall came back to their senses. The Wang family master stood up and asked in surprise, Yong, what are you doing? Wang Yong threw the chair down and shook his head. The emperor and County Marquis Li were outside just now. Hearing this, everyone's expression changed. The Wang family. Li Xian's face was gloomy and his eyes were filled with disappointment. Li Yi smiled and said unconcernedly, He can't represent the Wang family. Li Xian suddenly looked at him and asked, Do you think the officials really think this way? Think what? Li Yi took a sip of wine and asked casually. They think you have too much power and that I will be afraid of you. Li Xian stood up and said, Since it's like this, I'll let them open their eyes and see. Li Yi had a bad feeling and asked, What are you going to do? You'll know tomorrow, Li Xian said with a dark face and strode out of the door. A moment later, in the same place, Wang Yong's expression was complicated. He sighed and said, Father has already told him to return to Luochuan. He will never set foot in the capital again in this life. Li Yi shook his head. Why is this necessary? Sister will explain it to the emperor. Wang Yong lowered his head and said, The Wang family will always be a friend of the Li family. Brother Li, don't think too much. The commoners and even the officials all thought that the Wang family was the largest family in the Jing kingdom. With the Wang family's power, they could do whatever they wanted in the Jing kingdom without fear. The Cui family thought the same back then, so the Cui family died out. From then on, he knew that some people could only be friends and not enemies. Wang Yong came to apologize on behalf of the Wang family and brought a very generous gift. Li Yi had to accept this gift. If he didn't accept it, it would be a rejection and a falling out with the Wang family. He was just an arrogant playboy and couldn't represent the Wang family. Li Yi knew this very well. Moreover, this gift was very expensive and it wouldn't be easy to return it. Li Yi saw Emingzu in the afternoon. What happened to you and the Wang family? Emingzu walked in from outside and said in surprise, The Empress asked me to tell you that today's matter wasn't what the Wang family wanted. Li Yi waved his hand and said, It's just a misunderstanding. Emingzu looked at him and asked doubtfully, Then what are you worried about? Li Yi sighed and said, Li Xian. Chapter 979. When the previous emperor was on the throne, he was diligent in governing the court. Unless he was seriously ill or under special circumstances, morning court was rarely interrupted. Although the current emperor was not as diligent as the previous emperor, morning court was still held every day. It was just that the person presiding over the morning court was changed to the eldest princess. The civil and military officials were used to this. It was not strange to not see the emperor during morning court, but it was strange to see the emperor. Thus, when they stood neatly in the court and saw the eldest princess and the emperor walk out from both sides, they were a little surprised. Today was not the first day of the lunar year, nor was it a special day. It was rare for the emperor to come to court. As for whether the emperor regretted his previous slacking, it was not something the officials could guess. After the slight surprise, the morning court was held as usual. An official from the Academy of Sciences reported in detail the recent research progress of the academy. The Minister of Rights advised the emperor to expand the harem to stabilize the foundation of the country. A senior censor said that the prime minister could not be left vacant. The current prime minister of Qin was old, and a new prime minister had to be chosen as soon as possible. The emperor highly praised the research of the Academy of Sciences and ignored the Minister of Rights. He looked at the officials and slowly said, "I already have a candidate in mind for the prime minister position. There is no need to say more." Many people in the court felt bitter when they heard this. They said more because the emperor already had a candidate in mind. The candidate he had in mind was really not suitable for the position of prime minister. Li Xian looked at the eunuch beside him and slowly said, "Announce the decree." "Yes, your majesty." The eunuch nodded respectfully and took out an imperial decree. He walked forward and glanced at the officials below. It was this one glance that caused everyone to feel a sense of foreboding. At this moment, the eunuch's shrill voice came from above. The imperial decree. Countless people's hearts sank when they heard the word imperial edict. The wording of the imperial decree was very particular. The wording was different depending on the content. There were three main types: imperial decree, regulation, and imperial decree. Imperial decree was used to reward and also to warn. Regulation was used to announce to the officials and express the emperor's favor. As for imperial decree, it was used to announce to the world that it was not used unless it was an important matter. The emperor used imperial decree to appoint a crown prince and a princess. More importantly, there was no need for an imperial edict to be conferred the title of prime minister. The Marquis of Chong'an County, Li Yi, is intelligent and has made great achievements. Since the early years of Jinghe, he created Tian Fa, offered horseshoes, changed interrogation by torture, repelled the enemy, opened the school of mathematics, and stopped the flood. The eunuch was still reading aloud. The ears of the hundreds of officials in the hall were buzzing. Marquis Li Yi of Chong'an County. Sure enough. As expected, His Majesty did not listen to his advice and insisted on making County Marquis Li the Prime Minister. He would be the youngest Prime Minister in the history of the Jing Kingdom, and the laziest Prime Minister. Immediately, the faces of several censors and old officials changed. They stood out from the crowd. Before the imperial edict was finished, they were not allowed to interrupt. Otherwise, it would be a serious crime. But at this moment, everyone could see the determination on their faces. Get rid of the vermin, sweep away the crooks, push forward the reforms. Your contributions are great. Confer the title of Jiang of Silla to show the grace of the heavens. Pass it on forever. Take it and rest. Brilliant. The eunuch's voice was still echoing in the hall. Inside the hall, the expressions of some people finally relaxed. Not the Prime Minister. It turned out that it was just to confer the title of Jiang of Silla, not the Prime Minister. It seemed that His Majesty was still, Jing. Jiang of Silla? One word king. Jing was the title of the Jing Kingdom. Jiang of Silla had always been the most respected prince. Since decades ago, there had been no Jiang of Silla in the royal family. Now, His Majesty conferred this title to a person with a different surname, a person who was not from the royal family. This was ridiculous. This was the biggest joke in the world. Emingzu looked at Li Xian, who had a serious face. Her lips moved, but she did not say anything in the end. Your Majesty, please think twice. It is against the ancestral rules for a foreign official to be conferred the title of king. Your Majesty, please think twice. The imperial court was in an uproar. Countless officials knelt down and said loudly, "I have made up my mind." Li Xian waved his hand and walked out from the side. A eunuch said loudly, "Court dismissed." Prime Minister Shen, say something.
Lord Wang, we can't let His Majesty act willfully.
Lord Yang, please go and see the Empress Dowager.
We can't let His Majesty act so willfully. Princess, Your Highness, please persuade His Majesty again.
After the officials got up, they immediately placed their last hope on a few important officials. The head of the Wang family sighed. He knew why His Majesty would do this, so he also knew that His Majesty would not retract this imperial edict.
An old man shook his head and said, His Majesty is different from the late emperor.
At this time no one can say anything. Prime Minister Shen looked out of the palace with his murky eyes and murmured, No, there is one more person.
His Majesty will definitely listen to his words.
In a certain palace in the imperial harem, Wang Qin brought a cup of tea and put it in front of Li Xian.
She said softly, My husband, don't be angry. They said I was suspicious of him.
Li Xian held her hand and asked her to sit aside. Then he sighed and said, Qin, do you think he can understand what I did? Wang Qin sighed, but she could only sigh. There were some things that even if she could see clearly, she couldn't explain to him.
He was worried that County Marquis Li would overthink because of the rumors outside, but he didn't know that the more he thought like this, the worse his situation would be. Today, not only the imperial court was in an uproar, but even the common people were also in an uproar in a very short time.
Since His Majesty ascended the throne, County Marquis Li's power had reached its peak. Since ancient times, such officials never had a good ending.
Not only the officials in the imperial court, but also the common people in the capital were guessing that it wouldn't be long before His Majesty began to suspect him. The decline of the Li family was a foregone conclusion. Who would have thought that after such a short period of time, His Majesty would give all of them a resounding slap in the face?
Jiang of Silla, king of the one word. A foreign official being made a king. Since the founding of the country, no foreign official had ever received such an honor. Although County Marquis Li's achievements were great and no one in the imperial court could compare to him, in the end, he didn't have the merit of opening up territory. If he led troops to destroy the Qi kingdom or the Zhao kingdom, it would be understandable if he was made a king. But now he was too young. This emperor's favor was a bit too much. Just like that, he was made a king of the one word. The emperor had directly expressed his attitude. In the future, who in the entire capital would dare to provoke the Li family? The Li family.
The head of the family being made a king was a great honor.
The entire manor was in jubilation.
Li Yi had just sent off the worried old woman and sat back in the courtyard. He rubbed his slightly swollen head when the princess walked in from outside.
He sighed and said, Didn't we agree to have you stop him? Mingzu shook her head and said, You know that no one can stop him if he wants to do something. Why do you have to stop me? Li Xian walked out from the back and said, You have done so much for the Jing kingdom and the world. What is a mere king? Have you not counted how many foreign officials have been made kings since the founding of the Jing kingdom? Li Yi shook his head and said, You don't care what the court officials think or what the people think. I don't care what they think. Chapter 980. Li Yi knew what Li Xian was thinking, but he didn't know that he would actually do this. Jiang of Silla, king of the one word, was practically the person with the highest status in the Jing kingdom, other than the emperor. This was what it meant to be under one person and above millions. He didn't try to persuade Li Xian to retract the edict, because what was more influential than a foreign official being made a king was to retract the edict after being made a king. Normal people understood that a gentleman's words cannot be retracted by 4 horses. And as an emperor, his words were even more important. Li Xian didn't care about this at all. He said, Don't worry if the officials object, I will take responsibility. At this moment, it was too late to say anything. He knew Li Xian's personality better than anyone else. Li Yi shook his head and said, Let's not talk about this, let's drink. The wine was made by Xiao Zhu. Xiao Zhu's wine had 2 characteristics. One was that it tasted sweet, and the other was that it went to the head easily. Li Xian gulped down 2 cups and started to sway. Tell me, what's so good about being an emperor and a prince? Why are there so many people fighting to the death? Li Xian's eyes were hazy from drunkenness.
He murmured, I still feel that those days in Qing and Prefecture were the most comfortable, the most carefree. Li Yi actually wasn't in the mood to drink.
Today's events, Li Xian had only started. The troublesome things were still to come. I know you don't want to be a prince, but I want to shut their mouths.
Li Xian slapped the table and suddenly said, "This capital is not interesting at all. Why don't we run? Didn't you say that there's a fun place near Suzhou that no one can control? Why don't we go there?" Li Mingzu looked at the two people beside her and shook her head slightly. The person who least wanted to be an emperor had become an emperor, and the person who least wanted to be a prince had become a prince. Sometimes, things in this world were so ironic. She stood up and lightly tapped Li Xian's shoulder. He immediately fell asleep on the table. She sat back down and looked at Li Yi, asking, "What should we do now?" Ever since Li Xian succeeded to the throne, Li Yi had been aware of certain things. However, he hadn't expected that Li Xian's sudden action would push a certain contradiction to the peak. "I don't know." He shook his head, looked at her and asked, "Are you hungry? I'll cook you a bowl of rice." "I'm not hungry." Mingzu shook her head. "One egg or two?" "Two." Reincarnation was a technical job. If one was born in the family of an emperor, king, general, or minister, they would not have to worry about food and drink for the rest of their lives. They would enjoy endless glory, splendor, and wealth. If they were born in a commoner's family, they would be born a notch lower than others. They would need to put in more hardships and effort than those people to earn a good future, but they might not be able to catch up to those people. Among these, the best situation was to reincarnate into the family of an emperor. Without any effort, they would be born princes and princesses. Children born in poverty might be able to change their fate with hard work and become a general and minister. But their birth had already determined that the highest they could achieve in this life was to become a general and minister. If they wanted to go one step further, they could only pray for a good reincarnation in their next life. However, there was always an exception. Yesterday's County Marquis Li and today's Jiang of Silla had created a precedent that had never been seen since the founding of the Jing Kingdom. There was a lot of discussion among the people. Other than expressing surprise, there wasn't anything else. On the imperial edict, the achievements of Jiang of Silla over the years were clearly written. In these years, many good changes had happened around them. People could almost see the shadow of Jiang of Silla in almost everything. He was made an exception to be conferred the title of king. It was unexpected, but also reasonable. There were not many objections from the people. However, because of this matter, the court and the royal family had a very tense relationship with the current emperor. There was no need to talk about the royal family. They all came from the Li family. How could they easily allow an outsider to interfere? Led by a few old members of the royal family with the surname Li in Jingdo, they protested to the emperor. The princes outside had not received the news, but presumably, they would not agree. In the court, there were already some complaints about the emperor's stubborn insistence on making County Marquis Li of prime minister. Now, the emperor did not make him prime minister and directly made him a king. In the future, when the prime minister saw him, he would also have to bow. Following an emperor who would flip the table at the slightest disagreement, it was really a headache. Whether it was the people, the court, or the royal family, Li Yi did not pay attention to any of them. After being conferred the title of king, he did not even invite guests to celebrate. There was no difference from the past. If one had to go into detail, there was still a difference. In the past, it was very leisurely at home. Now he had to look after 3 children at the same time: Li Duan, Yongning, and Shaoning. The 3 of them could not even handle it. He couldn't help but imagine his future and couldn't help but worry. Of course, Shaoning was no longer a child. Many times, she could help him look after the children. This was a very good change. Feng stood behind him with some confusion and asked, "Son-in-law, do we really not need to change the signboard on our door?" Li Yi waved his hand. "No need. I have no choice but to change it." Old Feng shook his head and said, "Son-in-law is now a prince, so the entrance can't be so shabby. We have to change 2 bigger stone lions, and the plaque should also be changed. Let's talk about it later." Li Yi shook his head and said, "Is there anything important these few days?" "Important." Feng scratched his head and said, "The important thing is that you have been conferred the title of Jiang of Silla. There seems to be nothing else." "Right, yesterday, the Baldi sent a letter. He said that he now has a lot of people under him. They have built a city in the mountains. I don't know the specifics. These things are all managed by Second Mississippi. If son-in-law wants to know, I can go to Second Miss to get the information." Feng got up and left. Soon, he came back and said, "Son-in-law, there is an old man outside looking for you." The old man who came to find him should be one of the most powerful old men in the Jing kingdom.
Li Yi stood up and walked to the front hall.
He cupped his hands to the old man who was waiting in the hall.
I didn't know that Prime Minister Shen was coming. I didn't go out to greet you. Prime Minister Shen stood up and bowed in return.
He said, this old man can't accept a bow from Jiang of Silla. The Li family and the Shen family could be considered to have some friendly relations.
Prime Minister Shen had stood behind him several times in the court.
He had people serve good tea, and after chatting for a while, he opened his mouth and asked, right now, only Prime Minister Shen is supporting the court.
You should be very busy. How come you have the time to come here to drink tea? Prime Minister Shen smiled and shook his head.
He said, this old man didn't come here to drink tea with Jiang of Silla. He put down the teacup and said, although Jiang of Silla is not in the court, I think he should know about the situation in the court these days.
Li Yi didn't deny it.
Prime Minister Shen raised his teacup and said with a smile, this old man hasn't thanked Jiang of Silla for Su Su's matter. He was talking about Shan Su disguising herself as a man and sneaking into the Mathematics Academy.
Li Yi suddenly realized that Prime Minister Shen had always kept a low profile in the court. He was the complete opposite of Prime Minister Qin and belonged to the gentle faction. But at their age, which one of them who could get to this position was not an old fox? The matter between Shan Su and Li Xian, whether it was unintentional or the Shen family intentionally pushed it, was ultimately the Shen family who benefited.
He couldn't help but look at the old man in front of him in a new light.
Li Yi didn't respond, and Prime Minister Shen didn't continue on this topic.
He looked at him and slowly said, I think Jiang of Silla knows His Majesty's temperament better than anyone else. His Majesty has fallen out with the court officials and clan members this time.
The court is not stable. If this continues, there will be great losses. Only you can persuade His Majesty. Li Yi looked at him and asked, what do you want me to do? Prime Minister Shen shook his head.
This old man doesn't know what to do, but I know that His Highness Jiang of Silla definitely knows.
You are not me. How do you know that I know? Jiang of Silla is also not me. How do you know that I don't know?
If he continued to ask, he would be suspected of exaggerating the number of words.
Li Yi shook his head and didn't want to argue with the old man in front of him.
There were some things that everyone was well aware of.
At this point, he couldn't say any more. Chapter 981.
This old man will take his leave.
Take care, Prime Minister Shen.
After sending off Prime Minister Shen, Li Yi walked back to the courtyard and sat down. Prime Minister Shen did not come today to discuss the philosophical problem of man is not fish with him.
Li Xian was stubborn and did things based on his passion.
But as a scientist, he had a very important trait: persistence. He persisted until he hit the southern wall and did not turn back. After that, he continued to stride forward. When the former emperor was on the throne, he did not make arbitrary decisions. Most of the time, he would discuss with the court officials and take into consideration the opinions of the court officials.
Li Xian usually did not care much about political affairs.
But when he decided on something, no matter how many people opposed it, it could not change his mind. In the past, he was the crown prince. There was still Prince Ning and the former emperor who could restrain him. Now that he was the emperor, the entire world was his and no one could restrain him. If the royal family and the court officials continued to be in a deadlock with him, the one who would last until the end would definitely be Li Xian.
As for Li Yi, he was pushed to the front just like that.
But this could not be blamed on him. He never did things in a roundabout way. If the court officials felt that he was suspicious of him, he would be bestowed the title of Prime Minister. If the court officials continued to be suspicious, he would be bestowed the title of King.
This was his attitude.
Simple and straightforward, slightly rough. This was a method that made people feel angry, funny, and touched.
It was even a little childish.
Of course, this kind of childishness was not a good thing when it appeared on the ruler of a country. In the courtyard, Xiao Zhu, Xiao Huan and Xiao Cui were playing kuju. Li Yi waved to her and said, Xiao Zhu, help me warm a pot of grape wine later.
Okay, I will go immediately.
Xiao Zhu passed the rattan ball to Xiao Huan and ran towards the kitchen. Li Yi thought for a moment and added, this time make it less strong. Mississippi Lu was not at home, so there was no one to drink with him. Li Yi poured himself a cup of wine and drank by himself, thinking about what had happened just now. In another direction, Rui withdrew her gaze and said in a low voice, "Even though he has been conferred the title of king, my husband is still not happy." Ruoqing had a worried look on her face as she said, "This time, he was conferred the title of Jiang of Silla.
It seems to be a great favor, but too much may not be a good thing."
After His Majesty ascended the throne, the Li family had already made many people afraid. This time, with the great favor of the emperor, they will be even more afraid. It is not a good thing to stand out in the forest.
Rui had a thoughtful look on her face.
She looked in that direction for a long time before saying, "There's something I want to discuss with my two younger sisters." She whispered a few words, and a smile appeared on Drunken Mo's face. She said, "As you wish, sister." Ruoqing also nodded and said, "I'll listen to you."
Li Yi drank grape wine as he thought about this matter.
Before the previous emperor died, he had given Emingzu and Li Xian to him to watch over the court and the world. Later, he had Changde bring a message for him to take care of Yongning and Shaning. He was not their nanny, so what right did he have? At that time, he had been blinded by greed and agreed to take care of Yongning, Shaning, and Emingzu.
This was what he should do. Take care of Li Xian, who asked him to be his only good brother. He accepted it, but to ask him to take care of the entire court and the world was a bit too much. At first, he had thought that a gentleman's word could not be retracted. If he wanted to take care of them, then so be it. But now, he wanted Li Xian to sit firmly in this position. The ruler and officials were in harmony, and the court was stable. He also wanted to stay in Jingdo and watch over the world of the Li family for him. These two matters conflicted. Up until now, he still hadn't thought of a suitable solution. A sliver of indignation rose in Li Yi's heart.
The old emperor, oh the old emperor.
Did he lie to his daughter or something?
Before he left, he still had to trick him. He frowned and reached for the wine pot, but he caught nothing. Rui picked up the wine pot and filled his cup to the brim.
She also poured a cup for herself. Looking at him, she smiled and said, "Let me drink with you." Rui usually didn't drink, not even grape wine. Other than that one time when she was pestered by Li Yi to make up for it, she had never taken the initiative to drink. Surprised, Li Yi clinked his cup with hers. She took a small sip before looking at Li Yi and saying, "There is something I want to discuss with you." Rui didn't use this kind of tone and expression to talk to him.
Li Yi asked in confusion, "What is it?"
Rui looked at him and said, "I want to go out for a walk." Hearing this, Li Yi was stunned. He then stood up and said, "I want to go out for a walk with my wife. I'm not talking about outside the house." Rui shook her head and said, "I'm talking about outside the capital. After staying in the capital for so long, I'm a bit bored. I want to bring my husband, Duaner, Rui, Xiaofan, and my two younger sisters out to play for a few days and see the scenery. The last time I went out with my husband was more than 2 years ago." Rui rarely took the initiative to make a request of him. Li Yi thought for a moment and didn't think for long.
He nodded and said, "Okay." The world was so big.
If Rui wanted to go out and see, he naturally had to accompany her.
However, this way, he would probably have to go back on his promise to the old emperor.
Forget it. If he went back on his promise, then so be it. At most, the next time they met, he would let him kick him a few times to vent his anger. He looked at Rui and asked, "Wife, where do you want to go?" "Of course, my husband."
Li Yi nodded and asked again, "Then when are we leaving?"
Rui thought for a moment and said, "We have to leave some time to prepare. Why don't we leave at the beginning of next month?" There was still more than half a month until the beginning of next month. There was enough time to prepare.
Li Yi stood up and let out a long sigh of relief.
This trip would probably take a long time.
There were some things he needed to explain to the old madam.
The brothels and shops in the capital had to be arranged properly. The brothels and shops had already formed a system. He didn't need to interfere too much. Even if he left for a year or two, they would still be able to operate normally. There was no need to worry too much. As for where to go this time, he needed to think carefully. Li Yi sat in the courtyard thinking. Mississippi Lu carried a small wine jar and sat opposite him. Mississippi Lu always drank from a bowl.
Li Yi poured himself a bowl of wine and asked, "How has Lu Meng been recently?" Mississippi Lu replied casually, "Same as usual."
Li Yi asked again, "Any news from the fringe?" Mississippi Lu said casually, "For the past 2 years, Lu Meng has been sending people there. They have conquered some territories. It's considered some achievements. If Mississippi Lu used some achievements to describe it, it must be more than just some achievements. Back then, he just happened to pass by there and arranged something. He didn't think much about it. Now it was an unexpected gain. Thinking of something, Li Yi suddenly asked, Rui, do you have any particular place you want to go? No. Mississippi Lu shook her head. Think about it carefully. Li Yi looked at her and said, when you were young is fine too. Do you have any places you want to go, things you want to do, or ideals? When I was young. Mississippi Lu thought for a moment and looked at him. She asked, does becoming the king of bandits count? Yes. Li Yi was stunned. Then he looked at her and murmured, King of bandits, what a coincidence. Mississippi Lu looked at him and asked, you wanted to be the king of bandits when you were young? Li Yi thought for a moment and nodded. More or less. Chapter 982. Two tigers cannot share one mountain. In this world, there can only be one person who can become the king of bandits. Unless it's a male tiger and a female tiger. Unless one of them is a woman who wants to be the king of bandits, and the other is a man who wants to be the king of bandits. The chances of winning against Mississippi Lu for that position were slim. Li Yi could only choose the second option. I have something to tell you. He picked up the bowl with one hand and gulped down the wine in it. He looked at Mississippi Lu and said, we're leaving. Mississippi Lu finally raised her head and looked at him. She asked, where are we going? The world is so big. While we're still young, how can we not go out and see the world? Li Yi looked at her and said, haven't we achieved some results in the fringe? Why don't we go there with Lu Meng and occupy all the mountains there? We will unify all the bandits in the fringe. Those who submit to us will prosper, and those who oppose us will perish. Whoever dares to resist will be beaten up until they stop resisting. This way, not only will we rid the people of evil, you will also realize your childhood dream. This news was a little sudden. Mississippi Lu was stunned for a moment. Then she looked at him and asked, really? Of course. Why would I lie to you? Li Yi shook his head and said, when we unify the fringe and consolidate the forces there, we will go to the Wu Kingdom. Isn't your disciple rebelling in the Wu Kingdom? We'll help her drag that dog of a king of the Wu Kingdom down from the throne. What do you think? Mississippi Lu glanced at him and asked, you're not going to be the Jiang of Silla? Li Yi waved his hand and said nonchalantly, what Jiang of Silla? How is Jiang of Silla more important than realizing your dream? Mississippi Lu thought for a moment and nodded. I think your suggestion is good. Sir, I just heard Sister Rui say something about leaving. When Li Yi was packing things in the room, Xiaofan held Yongning's hand and walked in from outside. She asked, are you going out to play? Where are you going? For how long? I'm going to a very far place. Li Yi shook his head and said, I don't know how long I'll be gone. Xiaofan looked at him and asked, just like last time? Yongning clearly remembered what happened last time. She walked over and hugged Li Yi's arm. She begged in a soft voice, brother, I want to go too. Don't leave Cinny behind. Li Yi carried her up and said with a smile, of course I have to bring Cinny along. Xiaofan looked a little hesitant as she asked, is it as long as the last time? Maybe a little longer than the last time. Li Yi looked at her and asked, Bing Ning, do you want to go? If it's that long, Mother won't agree. She showed a hopeful look on her face, but in the end, she could only shake her head gloomily and said, I'll wait at home for you to come back. Li Yi nodded. She had a distressed look on her face and murmured, next time when I grow up, you must bring me along when you go out to play. Okay. Li Yi smiled and put Yongning down. He said, go play. Looking at the two little girls walking out hand in hand, Li Yi retracted his gaze. There was a trace of a complicated look on his face. The lake in the academy had now become the most popular place in the 3 academies. The lakeside was filled with green plants, and the bluestone road was paved with long benches for people to rest on. It was the first choice of the academy's students for their morning recitation. It was now class time, and there were not many people in the academy. On the bluestone road, Li Yi, Li Xian, and Emingzu walked side by side. Because of their identities, the former 3 heroes of the capital were no longer addressed as such. Li Xian turned his head and looked around. He sighed and said, "In these 2 years, the capital has changed a lot. Thinking back to when I first came to the capital, I really can't recognize it."
This sentence should not be said by him, because the people who had caused these changes in the capital were here.
In these 2 years, they had almost turned the capital upside down.
They had built the 3 academies, fought against the king of Shu, fought against the Cui family, and overcome all kinds of obstacles in the court.
They had implemented a new system, and had established the current situation in the capital. Li Xian did not feel that it was shameless to say this. He said as he walked, "In a few days, I plan to expand this place and build a few more academies. The Academy of Sciences should also be divided. By then, you can give me some ideas. I will leave the capital for a while. What do you think about merging the School of Mathematics into the Academy of Sciences?"
But Han might not be willing.
Li Xian was startled.
He looked at Li Yi and asked, "What did you just say?" Li Yi looked at the lake and said, "In a few days I may not be of much help.
I will leave the capital soon." Li Xian stopped, and Emingzu also looked at him. "Leave the capital?" Li Xian looked at him and asked in disbelief, "If you leave, what about your family's brothel and shop in the capital?" Li Yi looked at him strangely and asked, "I will only go out to play with Rui and the others." "What brothel and shop?" "Speaking of the brothel and shop, you have to help me keep an eye on them while I am away. Don't let anyone bully them. You are now the Jiang of Silla. Who would dare to cause trouble for your family's brothel and shop?" Li Xian frowned and said, "Why are you suddenly leaving? My wife said she was tired of staying in the capital and wanted to go out for a walk. What can I do?"
Li Yi shook his head and said, "Besides, there is no point in staying in the capital all the time.
It is good to go out and see the scenery." Li Xian looked disappointed. He then sighed and said, "I really envy you.
You can leave whenever you want." He looked at Li Yi and asked, "How long will you be away this time?"
Li Yi thought about it and said, "At least half a year. At most. It is hard to say." Li Xian looked at him and said in surprise, "So long? I don't know the exact time. If I don't take advantage of my youth to see the great rivers and mountains, there will be no more opportunities in the future." Li Yi shook his head and said, "By the way, I want to bring Yongning with me this time. I am worried that if I leave her for too long, her illness will relapse. That child will only be close to you."
Li Xian was slightly depressed, but he still nodded and said, "I will give an order."
"When will you leave?" "At the beginning of next month." "No, you still have to give me some ideas about the Academy of Sciences." Li Xian shook his head and said, "If you leave, it will be difficult for me to do these things in the future. Wait here for a while. I will immediately go to the Academy of Sciences to get the materials." After Li Xian left in a hurry, only he and Emingzu were left here.
The princess had her head lowered since the beginning and did not say a word.
After Li Xian left, she walked alone in the direction of the pavilion in the middle of the lake. Li Yi followed her to the pavilion. She finally asked, "Where are you going this time?" Li Yi thought about it and said, "My current plan is to go all the way west. I will first go to Qing'an Prefecture, and in the end, I will probably go to Xuzhou." Emingzu suddenly looked up at him and asked, "Are you coming back?" "How is that possible?" Li Yi said with a smile.
He looked into her eyes and then lowered his head.
The two of them fell into a long silence. Emingzu did not ask any more because she knew why Li Yi had left. As long as he was still in Jingdou, the conflict between Li Xian and the officials would not be resolved. If a prince who was favored by the emperor and had power greater than the heavens stayed in Jingdou, countless people would not be able to sleep at night. He chose to leave for Li Xian. If he still wanted to come back, he would not think about leaving. After an indeterminable amount of time, Li Yi finally raised his head. Seeing her serious expression, he reached out to tug at the corner of her mouth and pulled out a smile. He said with a smile, "Of course I will come back. You are still here, how can I not come back?" Emingzu did not care about the hand that was playing tricks on her face.
She stretched out her little finger and said, "Pinky swear."
Seeing her action, Li Yi was first startled. Then he also stretched out his little finger and entwined it with hers.
He said, "Pinky swear."
Emingzu stretched out her thumb and pressed it tightly against his. "Pinky swear. Hang yourself. Don't change for 100 years. Chapter 983. The capital is not peaceful these days.
It's good for you to go out for a walk. The old madam hugged Li Duan and sighed.
But Dwainer is still so young.
Will he be able to endure such a long journey? Li Yi comforted her.
It's a slow journey. There's no rush.
The journey was long, and it was inevitable that the horses and carriage would be tired. However, the Li family's carriages were specially designed and had good shock absorption. In terms of comfort, even Li Xian's imperial carriage could not compare, so it was not a big problem. Every time you go to a place, write a letter to Grandma. The old madam looked at him and warned him.
I don't know how long my old bones can last. I'm afraid I won't see the day Dwainer grows up. Li Yi shook his head. Master Tan Yin said that Grandma's body is healthy. It's not difficult for you to live to 100 years old. You will definitely see that day. I don't ask for a long life. I'm already satisfied to see you all well.
The old madam sighed again.
This trip will not be short. You will have to personally visit some manors. Li Yi nodded. I know.
With his current identity and status, as well as his connections in the capital, even if he left, he could not leave quietly.
He could not go on a trip with Rui like last time. Moreover, the meaning of this departure was completely different from the last time. Qin Manor.
An old man in a plain grey robe personally brewed a cup of tea and handed it to the opposite side.
He shook his head. I thought that the court was now clear and bright and talented people were emerging. I didn't expect that there would still be so many short-sighted people.
They are muddle-headed. After Prime Minister Qin resigned, he became more spirited. He had just chatted with him and learned that after the old man resigned, he drank tea and listened to the opera every day. This old man who had worked hard for the country for a lifetime, although he could not be said to be happy in his later years, at least he had some leisure.
He had acted on the stage for a lifetime. Now, it was time to sit down and listen to the opera. Li Yi took a sip of tea and smiled.
It's rare for a person to be muddle-headed in this lifetime. Prime Minister Qin shook his head and said, I know that the reasons His Majesty used to grant you the title of king are not everything you have. They lost a chance to sweep away all the countries and unify the world.
Li Yi smiled and drank his tea, lowering his head in silence. It's so difficult that I'm confused.
The old man stood up and said, Let's go.
This Jing kingdom can't keep you here. I want to go out for a walk as well. If I walk more after eating, perhaps I can live a few more years. Let's see how far you can go. I only hope that when the time comes, you won't point your sword at the Jing kingdom. Li Yi shook his head. Prime Minister Qin, you worry too much. I'm no longer Prime Minister Qin.
The old man smiled and said, It's rare to be muddle-headed. He walked out of the door with the help of his walking stick, followed closely by an old servant.
When Li Yi walked out of Qin Manor, he saw a few figures walking towards him. Be careful. He supported a woman and carefully walked up the steps. The woman's belly was slightly bulging, indicating that she was pregnant. The woman's face was somewhat familiar.
Li Yi quickly remembered that she was Lady Shuang's older sister, the girl called Lin Qin, who had cried out in front of the Ministry of Justice.
Help Madam inside first.
He ordered the two servant girls behind him, turned around, bowed and said, This commoner greets Jiang of Silla.
A man stood behind Qin He. When he saw Li Yi, his eyes revealed joy. Li Yi nodded slightly.
When he passed by them, he paused and asked, With your courage and ability, have you never thought about becoming an official in the court and reviving the Qin family?
Becoming an official in the court.
He smiled and then said, Becoming an official in the court is boring, and reviving the family is even more boring.
How can it be as free as being a commoner? Your Highness Jiang of Silla, what do you think?
Li Yi turned around and looked at the woman who had already gone far away. He raised his hand slightly and said, Congratulations in advance.
Thank you, Your Highness.
Fong sat in the carriage and asked, Son-in-law, where are we going now?
In the capital today, there were not many mansions that were worthy of him personally visiting.
Li Yi thought about it and said, To General Shui's manor. Although old General Shui's address had the word old in it, other than the white hair on his head and the wrinkles on his face, he had nothing to do with the word old. When Li Yi and Fong walked in, he was bare-chested and running around the courtyard with two huge stone padlocks in his hands.
When he saw Li Yi enter, He looked around and frowned. You brat. You really don't know the rules anymore. How can you not bring a gift when visiting the Venerable One's house? Li Yi waved his hand and said, I'm only here to see if old General Shui is still healthy. I'm not here as a guest. It seems that old General Shui is still strong despite his old age. I'll take my leave now. You still want to leave? What kind of place do you think the Shui Manor is? You can come and go as you please. Old General Shui threw over one of the stone padlocks in his hand. Li Yi caught it and threw it to Feng behind him. He turned around and said, The Shui Manor is a general's manor, not a bandit's lair. There's no need to be so overbearing, right? Old General Shui grinned and said, You don't say. My old Shui family's ancestors were indeed bandits. They followed the founding emperor to conquer the world and became a general. That's a coincidence. Li Yi smiled and said, My ancestors were also bandits. We're both bandits, but the difference is really big. Old General Shui looked at him with eyes that shone brightly. He said, I've long said that you are suitable for the army. I didn't think that your skinny arms and legs would hide so deeply. He then looked at Feng, who was tossing the stone padlock around like it was a rock. He said in surprise, If this was on the battlefield, he would be able to fight against 10 soldiers. Why, are you interested in joining the army? This old man can guarantee that within 2 years, you will at least become a chili arch. Although old General Shui was a sly old fox, he was still not good enough to fool Feng. He was much more interested in being a bandit than a chili arch. Within 2 years, he might be able to borrow the heads of 2 chiliarchs to play with. Let's talk about this in the future. Li Yi shook his head and said, I'm here this time to bid you farewell. Farewell? Old General Shui was startled, and the smile on his face gradually disappeared. He turned around and ordered a servant of the Shui Manor, Go, call old Ma and the others over. The generals' residences were not far from each other. Back when the imperial court divided the houses, the civil officials and military officials were separated very widely. Not long after, the few old generals appeared in the main hall of the Shui Manor. Old General Ma sighed and said, His Majesty's insistence on conferring the title of king to you is indeed somewhat inappropriate. Otherwise, the situation would not have turned out like this. Li Yi shook his head and said, It's not just because of this reason. I have more important things to do. Old General Shui turned to look at him and asked, What important things? Li Yi shook his head and did not reply. Let's not talk about this. Let's drink. Old General Ma slapped the table in annoyance and said, Let's not talk about these bullshit tea matters. Go and do whatever you want to do. Don't worry, with us old fellows in the capital, we will definitely protect the Li family. Li Yi came to visit these old generals with this intention. His own Li family was not afraid of anything, but the old Mistress Li family was different. With the double insurance of Li Xian and these old generals, he could only leave with peace of mind. He raised his wine cup and said, Let me toast to the generals. Old General Shui waved his hand and said, At this time, you brats still want to play tricks. Toast to this old man first. Old General Ma said angrily, Old Shui, why should I toast to you first? Is your face bigger or that thing bigger? Old General Shui said mockingly, In terms of face, this old man can't compare to your horse face. In terms of that thing, who has this old man been afraid of? Why don't we compete? I'm afraid of you. Li Yi hurriedly pulled the two of them apart and said, Didn't we compete last time? Let's not compete today. Let's drink, let's drink. Chapter 984. Even though Li Yi's alcohol tolerance had increased significantly during this period of time, he was still no match for these old generals who valued alcohol as much as their lives. This was especially so when the few of them added up. After a round of toasting, he realized that he could not drink any more. Thankfully, his alcohol tolerance had increased, and so had his alcohol tolerance. When he was drunk, he would just sleep. He would not act like a hero when he was drunk, nor would he talk nonsense when he was drunk. He would also not forget what had happened when he woke up. Of course, when he was drunk with Mississippi Lu and Emingzu, there was no way of knowing what he had told Mississippi Lu and what he had promised Emingzu. My alcohol tolerance is too high. Old generals, please continue. I'll take my leave first. If he drank any more, he would be a little drunk. Li Yi wobbled and bade farewell to the few of them. With Feng's support, he walked out of the Shui manor. Seeing him walk out, old General Shui sighed, shook his head and said, "This child. He's a good child." Old General Ma revealed a gratified expression. "It's the Jing Kingdom's fortune that His Majesty has such a confidant." Old General Shui suddenly picked up a wine jar and took a big gulp, scolding, "That bunch of trash! What do they know?" Old General Ma crushed the wine bowl in his hand and said fiercely, "After this, if anyone dares to cause any more trouble, no matter who they are, I'll skin them personally." The killing aura of an old general who had killed his way out of a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood was extremely strong. The two servants of the Shui clan at the door shuddered and silently moved further away. After walking out of the Shui manor's door, the hazy look in Li Yi's eyes disappeared. Feng let go of him and asked, "Son-in-law, where should we go next?" "Go." Li Yi gave it some thought and suddenly realized that there was no place in the entire capital that was worth him going to. He fell silent for a moment before saying, "Chen Clan's cloth shop." "All right." Chen Clan's cloth shop. Chen Chong looked at the young man who was limping into the shop and said, "Prince Exin, what are you doing here?" During the time of the national mourning, many of the princes rushed back to the capital. Now that the mourning period was over, the princes who stayed in the capital were already rushing back to their fiefs. Prince Exin had been attacked by the holy religion and had injured his leg, so he had been recuperating in the capital. He was the only exception among all the princes who had come of age. Over the past few days, Prince Exin came here every day. However, he did not create trouble and merely bought a piece of cloth every day. But the calmer he was, the heavier Chen Chong's heart became. "What's wrong? Don't tell me you're picky about who you sell your cloth to?" "I bought it for 100 taels of silver." Seeing the pained expression on third young Miss Chen's face, Chen Chong's countenance sank, and he said fiercely, "Your Highness Prince Exin, you're not welcome here. Please get out." "Chen Chong, who do you think you are?" Prince Exin's face, which had been wearing a smile all this while, suddenly turned extremely savage. He threw the cloth and scissors in his hands onto the ground, and green veins popped up on his forehead as he bellowed, "Do you think that the Chen clan is still the same Chen clan? Do you think that Li will still be able to protect you?" Chen Chong supported third young Miss Chen, clenching his fists tightly as he looked at Prince Exin, not saying a word. His Majesty disregarded the objections of the officials and members of the imperial clan, and conferred the title of Jiang of Silla to Li Yi. Although his status was extremely high, he had become a thorn in the eyes of many officials and nobles in the capital. His status was too high, and his authority was too great. His Majesty trusted him too much, trusting him to the extent that he could go against the opinions of all the officials and the ancestral rules, disregarding the repercussions, and act recklessly. While he was in the capital, Prince Exin could not act recklessly. Once he left the capital, one would be a guilty official while the other would be a prince. Even if Prince Exin were to do anything to them, he would not receive much punishment. It would be like how he had burned down the Zhang manor previously. However, to the Chen clan, this could be a calamity. The higher one climbs, the worse one falls. The roar on Prince Exin's face gradually turned into maniacal laughter. He even laughed until tears rolled down his face. "Jiang of Silla. Haha. Does he think that he's a prince just because His Majesty conferred him the title of Jiang of Silla? Won't he still have to leave the capital like a stray dog? After he leaves, it'll be your turn." The expression on Prince Exin's face gradually turned crazed. "He wants one of my legs, but I want your Chen clan to pay with your lives." Chen Chong took in a deep breath, and his expression turned calm as he said, "Li Xia, this is the capital. It's not a place where you can behave atrociously. Do you think that I'm the only one who wants your Chen clan to be destroyed?" Prince Exin was no longer bothered by the fact that Chen Chong had called him by his name. Hearing that, he laughed out loud and said, "The Wu family, the Chen family, the Wei family, the Zhang family. Which one of these people doesn't have a deep grudge against you guys?" "I know about the Wu family and the Chen family. But which one is the Wei family and the Zhang family?" A voice suddenly rang out from the door. Prince Exin's smile grew even wider. "The Wei family. Of course it's the Duke of Wei Manor. The Zhang family, the Zhang family." As he laughed, his voice gradually became softer.
The smile on his face froze, revealing a horrified expression. Of course, even if he had forgotten about it, he still had other arrangements for this place. With just Prince Xin or some other clans, they would not be able to create any waves. Meow you, meow you. Suddenly, Chen Chong's panicked voice came from behind. Li Yi hurriedly turned around and saw Chen Chong supporting Third Miss Chen with an anxious expression. Third Miss Chen's face was pale and she looked very weak. She shook her head and said, "Second brother, I'm fine." She looked at Li Yi with a smile on her face. "You're here." Li Yi hurriedly walked over and asked, "What's wrong?" She smiled, shook her head, and said, "I caught a cold 2 days ago. I'll be fine after some rest. It's not a big deal." Chen Chong turned to look at a shop assistant in the shop and said, "Li Jun, go get a doctor to take a look." "There's no need." Li Yi waved his hand, tossed something to Fong and said, "Fong, take this token and go to the palace to get the Imperial Physician token over." "All right." Fong took the token and ran out quickly. Chen Chong's lips parted, but he did not say anything else. He turned and said, "Meow you, I'll help you in to rest for a while." Li Yi stayed in the shop. When Chen Chong came out, he asked with a grim countenance, "What's wrong with you? How do you take care of people? Why did you suddenly catch a cold?" Chen Chong looked at him and said, "When Miao Yu heard that you were leaving, she said that she wanted to personally make a few sets of clothes for you. She worked through the night to make them and fell sick yesterday." Li Yi found a chair and sat down, no longer speaking. Chen Chong sat down on the other side and glanced into the room. When he turned back, hesitation, confusion and perplexity appeared on his face. After a moment, he suddenly asked, "You really have to leave?" Li Yi nodded. "I really have to leave." Chen Chong took a deep breath. After a long time he said, "Take Miao Yu with you." Li Yi thought for a moment, then said, "Don't worry. After I leave, I will take care of the matters here." Chen Chong's eyes were bloodshot as he stared at him. He lowered his voice and said, "Do you still not understand? Miao Yu will not be happy if she stays here." Li Yi's eyes widened and he said angrily, "Why don't you try being fierce again?" Chen Chong closed his eyes and leaned against the back of the chair as if all the energy in his body had been sucked out. Li Yi also looked into the room and said in a small voice, "I came here today precisely for this matter." Imperial physician Lu Jimin arrived very quickly. Just as he got off the carriage, he was carried in by Fong. "The medicine chest, don't forget the medicine chest." "I won't forget, hurry up." After standing up with great difficulty, he straightened his clothes and bowed respectfully to Li Yi. "This lowly official greets His Highness Jiang of Silla. No need for such formalities." Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Let's go in and take a look first." Lu Jimin nodded and walked into the room with the medicine chest on his shoulder. A moment later, he withdrew his 3 fingers from third young Miss Chen's wrist and said, "It's just a small cold. Coupled with the fact that you've been too tired these past 2 days, I'll prescribe a medicine. If you take it regularly, you'll be fine in 2 or 3 days." Chen Chong clasped his hands and said, "Many thanks, Lord Lu. I'll go write a prescription." Lu Jimin smiled and walked out of the room. "Third sister, rest for a while." Chen Chong smiled at third young Miss Chen lying on the bed and walked out of the room with Li Yi. Walking away from the door of the room, Chen Chong closed his eyes, clenched and unclenched his fists, loosened them and clenched them again. After a long time, he opened his eyes and said, "I'll take it as a promise." Li Yi looked at him and said, "You know that my promise is useless." Chen Chong took a deep breath and said, "I'll try to persuade Miao Yu." Li Yi shook his head and said, "Leaving the capital, leaving the Chen clan, she still won't be happy. It's the same principle." Chen Chong's eyes dimmed. "Your family is leaving the capital. How can our Chen clan follow?" "Who said it's just our family?" Li Yi shook his head and said, "There are several hundred to 1,000 people. If you want to leave, you can just be a coachman or coachman. It doesn't matter if there's one more person." This time around, they were leaving the capital to do something big. How could a few people be enough? The strategic center of the brothel was going to be shifted to the west, and they were going to build a new merchant group and build a business district in the west. The Lu Alliance would naturally have to shift their base as well. They were preparing to turn their previous business into a brothel. Those martial artists had been coming back and forth from the chaotic lands for the past 2 years and had long since treated that place as their second base. Now that the alliance head had left, what was the point of them remaining in the capital? In the past, they had been busy working for others and had been idling around. Now that they were finally going to fight for their own business, they were filled with vigor. Even their meals were much more delicious than before. Over 1,000 people. Chen Chong looked at him and was stunned for a moment before he gritted his teeth and said, "Why didn't you say so earlier? I saw that you were having a lot of mental activities earlier and couldn't bear to disturb you." After Chen Chong calmed down once again, Li Yi asked, "Do you remember the few clans that Prince Xian mentioned earlier?"
"What are you going to do?"
Chen Chong looked at him and asked.
"Kill him." Chapter 986.
In the main hall of the Wu clan, several people were seated at a table. There was a sumptuous feast on the table, and everyone was beaming. A middle-aged man let out a long sigh and said, "He's finally going to leave."
The person next to him drank a cup of wine, finally feeling relieved.
He nodded and said, "From a certain perspective, it's not a bad thing that His Majesty has conferred him the title of Jiang of Silla.
It's easy to leave the capital, but it'll probably be difficult for him to return.
It's good that he's gone.
With him gone, there'll be no one who can protect the Chen clan. The Li family and the Chen clan have a deep feud to begin with. Who would have thought that he would actually? In any case, Prince Xian will definitely not let the Chen clan off this time around. We just need to wait patiently for a few more days." The news that Li Yi, the Jiang of Silla, was about to leave the capital made all the influential officials in the capital secretly heave a sigh of relief. Most people felt that His Majesty had favored him too much and that it was detrimental to the stability of the court's politics. They felt that he had broken the rules of the aristocratic circle in the capital. After all, no one wished for the capital to have 2-3 emperors. Of course, to everyone present, due to the feud between him and the Chen clan, it would be hard for them to feel at ease with him in the capital. Therefore, they hoped that he would leave as soon as possible. After receiving this news, it was a must to hold a grand banquet. If it was not because they were worried that it would be too conspicuous, they would hold a banquet that lasted for 3 days. Right now, at the entrance of the Wu clan, Li Yi raised his head and looked at the signboard of the Wu clan and asked, "Is it this Wu clan?" Chen Chong nodded. "It's this Wu clan." On the way here, he had already thought through some things. Therefore, he was very cooperative with Li Yi.
"I've screwed it up."
Fong stepped on the stone lion at the entrance of the Wu clan and leaped up. He took down the signboard of the Wu clan and broke it into several pieces with a palm strike. Before the gatekeeper of the Wu family could react, his family's plaque was smashed.
He ran out and said angrily, Who are you?
What do you want?" After coming out of the cloth shop, they went directly to the nearest Wu family. Only Fong and Su were with them. Su disdained to do these things, so he followed them with his hands behind his back to watch the fun. Although Fong could do it alone, it was time-consuming and laborious. "Call your master out." Li Yi looked at the gatekeeper and said, "We don't have enough manpower. Let him find someone to help." The gatekeepers of large families rarely didn't know how to read people. In fact, after sitting in this position for a long time, they even knew how to read people better than their own master. Seeing that this young man had asked someone to smash the Wu family's signboard and humiliate the Wu family, yet he could still calmly call out to the old master. It was either that he had a powerful background or that he was crazy. Judging from the young man's temperament and the sturdy man, the former was more likely. The gatekeeper glanced at the broken signboard once more before running inside. The sloppy old man clasped his hands behind his back and said with great interest, "It's really great to be a prince." When the master of the Wu family heard that someone had smashed the plaque of the Wu family, he immediately rushed out with his men in a rage. This behavior was more ruthless than a slap in the face. It was something that all the families who valued face couldn't tolerate. He was the first to rush into the yard with his men and was the first to kneel. "Greetings, Your Highness, Your Highness, Your Highness," the master of the Wu family said in a trembling voice, his face pale and his voice trembling. Unless it was a special occasion, such as the coronation of a new emperor or an important ceremony, officials didn't have to kneel when they saw the emperor. Naturally, they didn't have to kneel when they saw the prince. However, the master of the Wu family still knelt because his legs were so weak that he couldn't stand up. The person before them had once been their nightmare.
Although he was going to leave the capital soon, as long as he was in the capital, they wouldn't wake up from their nightmare. There's no need to be so courteous. I'll be embarrassed later on. Li Yi looked at him and said, Do you know why I'm here today? The master of the Wu family said in a trembling voice.
I don't know.
I'm here to cause trouble. Li Yi looked at the master of the Wu family and said, But we don't have enough manpower now.
Can the Wu family help out?
The master of the Wu family knew that he was here to cause trouble and also knew why he was here.
Prince Xiaofan, that fool.
He had clearly said to bear with it a little more.
Yes.
The master of the Wu family steeled his heart and said, gritting his teeth, Go and call all the guards in the clan over.
Between causing trouble for the Wu family or completely wiping out the Wu family from the capital, even a fool would know how to choose.
The guards of the Wu family arrived very soon. The person in the lead looked at the master of the Wu family and immediately asked, Master, where are the troublemakers?
Smash.
The master of the Wu family squeezed out this word from his throat.
Smash.
The guard was stunned for a moment and asked, Smash what?
Smash the Wu family.
The master of the Wu family picked up a bonsai plant in the courtyard and smashed it fiercely onto the ground, causing soil to splatter everywhere. He looked at the guard and asked, Smash it like this, understand?
Old master.
The guard looked at the master of the Wu family in a daze, feeling both surprised and doubtful.
Could his old master be? Could he have gone crazy?
Seeing that the guard was still standing there in a daze, the master of the Wu family kicked him fiercely and said furiously, Hurry up!
If you're not going to make a move, pack up your things and scram.
The guard swallowed his saliva again, looked behind him and said to the crowd, Did you hear that?
Smash it.
Fong pointed to the inside of the room and said, And inside? The master of the Wu family kicked another guard and said loudly, Go inside and smash it. Fong reminded him, Pick the expensive ones and smash them. The master of the Wu family had a pained expression on his face. He gritted his teeth and said, Pick the expensive ones and smash them. Thus, the servants of the Wu family discovered a very strange scene. With their old master taking the lead and the guards, they smashed everything they could see in the house. The old master tore his favorite painting and smashed the vase he had bought with a lot of money a few days ago. The coral he had just smashed was worth 5,000 taels of silver. In the end, when there was nothing else to smash, their old master finally reached out his evil hand to the innocent tables and chairs. The Wu family was already in a mess. After searching around the house, they really couldn't find anything to smash. The master of the Wu family panted heavily and walked quickly to Li Yi's side. He asked carefully, Your Highness, look, is it okay?
It's not bad.
Li Yi nodded and said, Let's forget about this matter. Tomorrow you can resign and retire.
You don't need my help, do you?
The master of the Wu family hurriedly shook his head.
No need, no need.
The people behind him watched with fear in their hearts. Sir Wu was in the prime of his life, and it was the time when his career was the smoothest. For him to resign and retire at this time. Resigning and retiring at this time was already the best ending. If he needed Jiang of Silla's help to resign and retire, the ending might be a little different. Resigning and going to prison, resigning to a desolate place 1,000 li away, were all things that couldn't be more normal. Anyone could see that Jiang of Silla was venting his anger.
He wasn't targeting the Wu family.
He was targeting all the officials and nobles in the capital. The matter with the Chen family was just a prelude. He was establishing his might, and he was also intimidating. He was intimidating those who wanted to make a move after he left the capital. This was also the first time he was establishing his might after being conferred the title of Jiang of Silla. Only now did they realize that Jiang of Silla was Jiang of Silla. Before he became Jiang of Silla, the Cui family had offended him. The Cui family had fallen, and the king of Shu had offended him. The throne that had been in his hands had flown away. Now that he was already a prince, there were actually people who thought that this was the end of his road. Fong walked around the Wu family and asked Chen Chong, Old Chen, where to next?
The Chen family.
Chen Chong thought for a moment, then said to a person watching nearby, Sir Chen, please lead the way.
Chapter 987.
Sir Chen, please lead the way. Chen Chong's words caused the expression of a middle-aged man in the crowd to change. The Chen family and the Chen family had some old grudges. Of course, at that time, the Chen family was still a big tree in the imperial court. The Chen family spent a lot of money and connections to get an important position with great difficulty, but it was replaced by a member of the Chen family. For the Chen family, this might be done casually, but for the Chen family, it was a big loss. In the past, the Chen clan was backed by the king of Shu and had extraordinary influence in the imperial court. It was not something a mid-tier clan like the Chen clan could compare to. However, that was then and this was now. Now, the Chen family was like the sun in the sky, while the Chen family had fallen to the level of commoners. It was time to get revenge for the past. Who would have thought that the news would be leaked in advance and actually attract such a great god? Chen Chong looked at the stunned middle-aged man and shook his head. Forget it. I originally thought that Lord Chen was familiar with the road. Since Lord Chen is unwilling, we'll go ask a few passers-by. Wait. The middle-aged man walked out from the crowd and said in a low voice, I'm familiar with the road, there's no need to trouble others. Marquis Wei, Assistant Minister Zhang, do you want to go together? Chen Chong looked at the people in the crowd and said, In a while, I will have to trouble you. Even he himself felt that he was very arrogant when he said that. Even when the Chen family was at its peak, he had never been so arrogant. However, at the thought of what Prince Exine had said earlier, pay with your life, the flames in his heart that had been extinguished with great difficulty reignited once again. He only wanted these people to lead the way. What they wanted was the Chen family's life. Was this too much? A moment later, in the Chen family. Master, you are back. When the gatekeeper of the Chen family saw his master walk in, he immediately went forward and said respectfully. The head of the Chen clan said in a low voice, Let all the maids and servants come out. Gathering all the maids and servants in the mansion was something that had never happened before. The gatekeeper looked at him in surprise and asked, Master, is there something wrong? The head of the Chen clan clenched his teeth and said, Do as I say. Seeing the patriarch's expression, the gatekeeper quivered and hurriedly ran into the mansion after responding. Soon, all the guards, maids, and servants of the Chen clan had gathered in front of the Chen clan. The Chen clan's clan head looked at the signboard above the main gate, clenched his teeth and said, Smash! I'll go back first. Li Yi looked at Chen Chong, shook his head and said, I'll leave the rest to you. Feng, stay by his side for now. All right. Feng nodded his head. When he saw the Chen clan servants struggling to reach the plaque on the gate, he quickly walked up and smiled. Let me help you. On the way back, the sloppy old man picked his nose and asked, Kid, it doesn't feel good to be at a disadvantage, right? It doesn't feel good to be at a disadvantage, Li Yi nodded and said, but it feels good to be a bully. Everything that had happened today was indeed for some people to see. They feared him, thinking that he was powerful and lawless. If he didn't do something lawless, wouldn't he disappoint many people? On the way back to the cloth shop, he happened to see Chen Li Jun returning with a medicine. This person, who had once been one of the capital's greatest profligates, had long since been worn down by life. When he saw Li Yi, he avoided eye contact and hurriedly said, Greetings, Your Highness Jiang of Silla. Li Yi waved his hand and asked, Are you going to brew the medicine? Chen Li Jun nodded. Li Yi took the medicine from his hands and said, I'll do it. Chen Li Jun was startled and was about to say something when Li Yi waved his hand and said, Don't waste words. Go get the clay pot. Brewing medicine was a technical job that required a great deal of patience. Li Yi had endured 2 months for Mississippi Lu, so he naturally had a lot of experience. He squatted in the courtyard, holding a small fan in his hand, carefully controlling the heat. In a certain room, on a bed next to the window, a pale-faced married lady looked through the window at the busy figure in the courtyard with a smile in her eyes. Before one of the influential families in the capital, Chen Chong looked at the golden signboard, shook his head and sighed, It's a pity. Before him, a middle-aged man gritted his teeth and said, Smash! In the palace, all the members of the royal family in the capital had gathered. After an imperial physician checked on Prince Exine, he replied respectfully, Your Majesty, Empress Dowager, Prince Exine's arms are probably crippled. Prince Exine had already woken up, but his countenance was terrifyingly pale. He sobbed and said, Empress Dowager, brother, look at how arrogant that Li Yi has become. Li Xian looked at him and asked, You're a prince. Would you personally go to the cloth shop to buy cloth?
Prince Xian was speechless.
Li Xian asked again, "Could it be that he crippled your arms just because you bought a bolt of cloth?"
Prince Xian was speechless.
Li Xian asked again, "Why did you go to the Chen clan's cloth shop?" Prince Xian endured the pain and said, "When I entered the palace, that Li Yi was leading his subordinates and barging into the official residences of the important officials in the imperial court, smashing and looting them. He's showing no regard for the law." "Which one did he smash?"
"The Wu family and the Chen family."
Li Xian waved his hand. "Summon them into the palace." Over the past few days, no one from the Li clan who strongly objected to Li Xian conferring Li Yi the title of Jiang of Silla said anything.
He was clearly about to leave. Why was Prince Xian courting death? At a time like this, what else could he not do? Very soon, the heads of the Wu family and the Chen family were summoned into the palace.
After the two of them entered the palace, they immediately greeted, "Your subjects pay their respects to your Majesty and Empress Dowager." Li Xian looked at the two of them and went straight to the point. "Prince Xian said that the Jiang of Silla smashed your residences?" Prince Xian endured the pain and turned to look at the two of them, wearing a hopeful expression. The heads of the Wu family and the Chen family exchanged a glance and shook their heads at the same time. "I wonder where your Highness Prince Xian heard the rumors."
"There's no such thing."
"That's right. 2 days ago, I discussed with Lord Qian and planned to renovate the residences. Today, we smashed it ourselves and can start work tomorrow."
"Lord Wu is right."
"Your Majesty mustn't listen to the rumors?" Prince Xian looked at the two of them who were explaining with a serious expression. He felt that it was not just his arms that were hurting, but his heart was hurting as well. He could not move his arms and could only use his feet to point at the two of them. You guys." The head of the Wu family looked at him, shook his head and said, "Your Highness Prince Xian, you mustn't believe in the rumors." Prince Xian lay on the ground, looking at the roof of the hall. His eyes finally lost their color. Li Xian threw a glance at him, shook his head and said, "I'll get 2 imperial physicians to follow you. You can set off for your conferred land tomorrow." Li Yi did not care if Prince Xian entered the palace to lodge a complaint, nor did he care about the aftermath of the matter between the Chen family and the Wu family. He finished brewing the medicine, helped third young Miss Chen up, and then used a spoon to feed it to her. He put down the bowl, looked at her and asked, "Is it bitter?" She nodded and said, "A little."
"Eat an apple. It won't be bitter after you eat it." Li Yi picked up an apple and started to peel it. The only maid in the room watched in astonishment as the apple skin slid down in a spiral shape. Before it landed on the ground, she reached out to catch it. Third young Miss Chen looked at that maid and said softly, You can leave first." The maid-servant responded and retreated out of the room. Li Yi cut the apple into slices and handed it to her on a plate. She placed the plate at the side, held Li Yi's hand, and looked at him in a daze. Li Yi sat at the side of the bed. She suddenly put out her other hand and placed it on his face, gently caressing it. Li Yi did not dodge. She suddenly said. Li Yi looked at her. "Can you call me mother?" Chapter 988. Can you call me mother? When third Miss Chen said these words, Li Yi saw some affection, some tenderness, and some indescribable complexity in her eyes. "You have always been," Li Yi said softly as he tightened his grip on her hand. He revealed a smile on his face. "Mother." "Ah." A faint blush appeared on her pale face. She nodded her head and responded, seemingly using all the strength in her body. It took more than 2 hours for Fang and Chen Chong to return. In the end, the Chen family, Wei family, and Zhang family had all met the same fate as the Wu family. They had destroyed their own manners, resigned from their positions, and retired. The first to jump out always received the harshest punishment, but it was not the harshest. If they left the circle of the nobility in the capital and left the court, they could still become a wealthy official. At the very least, their clans could be preserved. After today, if there were still people who did not know the difference between life and death and jumped out, then he would not give them any leeway. Li Yi looked at Chen Chong and said, "Make preparations. We will leave at the beginning of May." It was no longer suitable for the Chen family to remain in the capital. Although Chen Chong did not like him and he did not like Chen Chong, he could not make his godmother sad. This time he could count him in. Chen Chong looked at Li Yi and asked, "Miao Yu Shi?" Li Yi waved his hand. Later today, I will come to pick her up. Chen Chong nodded and said no more. Feng seemed rather excited.
Using violence to solve problems was his hobby.
He was the happiest person to leave the capital this time.
If it were not for the fact that he still had his wife and Xiaofan at home, he would have made countless trips back and forth between the capital and Suzhou. He looked in surprise at Li Yi and asked, "Son-in-law, your eyes are a little red.
What's wrong? Did sand get in?"
The wind is rather strong today." The stone hanging in his heart finally fell. Li Yi nodded, stood and said, "Let's go back."
Li Duan wasn't used to the sudden addition of an elder.
He still couldn't understand some things, but he liked the sudden appearance of this grandma. A grandma who would feed him delicious food and play with him was much better than his aunt who always spanked him.
Rui and third Miss Chen had known each other for a long time. She often visited her with Li Yi.
As for Zuamo and Ruoqing, they were more familiar with each other. It was just that they were not used to calling each other mother instead of Mrs. Chen, and they would blush a little. The women were talking in the inner courtyard, while Tsang Shichen and Chen Chong were drinking in a corner of the outer courtyard. When Li Yi walked out, he got up and patted him on the shoulder, saying in a low voice, "Treat Zumo well." There was already a hint of drunkenness in his voice. During these few days at home, Li Yi had seen many people and drunk a lot. Lu Daio, Lu Yi, Dong Wenyun. These old acquaintances from Qing and Fu had all come to visit. There were also some friends he had made after coming to Jingdou. After this parting, he didn't know when he would see them again. A young girl's clear voice came from behind him. Li Yi turned his head and saw Shaoning standing behind him. She blinked at him and asked, "Sir, are you going out today?" Shaoning and Yongning had been at home these few days. Because there were many things to arrange before they left, they didn't have much time to spend with them. Li Yi reached out a hand and said, "I'll take you out to play today." A smile immediately appeared on her little face.
"I'll go call Yongning."
Just as she turned to run back, Li Yi shook his head and said, "I won't call Yongning today." "Ah, that's not good."
She paused and blushed slightly.
She put her hand in Li Yi's hand and walked outside as she spoke with embarrassment.
It was just her and her teacher going out.
Was this a date, just like last year's Lantern Festival night? That night, it was also just her and her teacher. They had even hooked their hooks. Her teacher had also said that he would never abandon her. After the death of the previous emperor, according to etiquette, Jingdou was not allowed to have fun for 100 days. During this time, the brothels, and theaters were all closed. Now that the 100-day period had just passed, Jingdou, which had been suppressed for a long time, showed an unprecedented liveliness and prosperity. After walking to the crowded street, Shaoning forgot about her bashfulness and returned to the nature of a girl. "Sugarman, sir, there's a sugarman. I want to eat this puppy." Li Yi paid and gave her a puppy. After eating it quickly, she looked at Li Yi expectantly and asked, "Sir, can I eat another one?" She liked to eat sweets. Usually, when Li Yi brought her and Shaoning out, he only allowed her to eat 2 at most. Seeing her blinking expectantly at him, Li Yi took out an ingot of silver and put it on the table. He took down all the sugarmen and handed them to her, saying, "They're all for you."
"Really?"
Her eyes began to twinkle like little stars. Li Yi stuffed a dozen sugarmen into her hands and said, "Eat them. Eat as many as you want today."
"Thank you, sir. You're the best." She resisted the urge to kiss Li Yi's face.
She took out a sugarman and handed it to Li Yi and said, "Sir, eat one too." In the past few months, she had been depressed for a long time. It had been a long time since she had seen such a bustling capital.
"Sir, come quickly."
A person who passed by just now said that someone is performing a sword-swallowing performance in front. After eating 3 sugarmen, she stopped eating. She handed all the sugarmen to the gods behind her, took Li Yi's hand, and ran to the place where the crowd gathered in front. The roadside performance place had been surrounded by 3 layers of people. It was impossible to squeeze in. She was anxiously walking around outside. Li Yi bent down, grabbed her waist with both hands, lifted her up, and put her on his shoulder. He asked, "Can you see it now?"
Yes."
The little girl blushed and answered in a low voice. She was no longer interested in the sword-swallowing performance inside. She used to envy Yongning, who could be carried by Sir and ride on his neck, but she had grown up. When a girl grew up,
She should be more ladylike. How could Sir let a ladylike girl sit on his shoulder?
How embarrassing. However, although it was embarrassing, she still didn't want to get down. After watching the performance absent-mindedly, when Li Yi put her down, the little girl's face was still red.
A moment later, in a clothing store somewhere, Xiaoning was wearing a slightly mature dress. She picked up the skirt and turned it around.
She looked at Li Yi and asked, "Sir, this dress is so beautiful.
Do I look good in it?"
"Yes." Li Yi looked at it carefully and nodded. He turned back and said, "Wrap it up."
In a jewelry store somewhere. "Sir, do I look good wearing this hairpin?"
"Yes."
"What about this?"
"It looks good too."
She tried on all the jewelry that she slightly liked in the store. As long as she asked, Li Yi would buy it regardless of the price.
Finally, her gaze landed on a woman's sword inlaid with jewels hanging in the store. She looked at Li Yi and asked tentatively, "Sir, I want to learn martial arts from Royal Sister. I'm so envious of Royal Sister and Sister Rui. When I become as powerful as Royal Sister, I can protect myself and Sir. This sword?" Li Yi nodded and looked at the shopkeeper at the side. He said, "Take that sword down."
She was wearing the newly bought clothes with a sword hanging on her waist. She held a sugar figurine in each hand. Even when she reached home, the smile on her face didn't disappear. Today's Sir was different from before. He was especially nice to her today.
Although Sir had been nice to her in the past, he wouldn't let her wear adult clothes, eat so many sugar figurines, play with dangerous things like knives and swords, and definitely wouldn't let her sit on his shoulder. However, Sir was so nice to her.
Why did she feel empty in her heart? This feeling was like the time when she lost her favorite knight Emingzu. Chapter 989. Yesterday, Prince Xian's hands had been crippled. Under the watchful eyes of everyone, several official residences in the capital had been smashed. This was already considered an extremely vile incident. By right, even if it would not cause a great impact, it should still cause some commotion. However, the imperial court today was as calm as usual. Prince Xian had left the capital early in the morning. His old injuries had yet to recover, and now he had suffered new ones. Right now, he did not even have time to recuperate. He would probably not be able to avoid suffering along the way and would not feel too comfortable. During the morning assembly, the 5 officials resigned at the same time. The emperor and the princess had tacitly agreed to it, and the officials knew what had happened. They did not say anything, but they all threw a glance at the figure standing at the very front. Li Yi had made a rare appearance in the imperial court today. It was because this should be the last time he would be attending the imperial court. The status of the one-word prince was higher than that of the prime minister. Prime Minister Shen and the newly appointed Right Minister Dong Wenyun were also ranked behind him. After the morning assembly, he did not leave the palace but waited in front of the political hall. "When are you leaving?" Emingzu, who had taken off her court attire, appeared behind him and walked over to stand next to him. "Tomorrow," Li Yi replied. The two of them sank into a long period of silence. Emingzu suddenly said, "I want to eat egg fried rice." "All right." Li Yi nodded and asked, "Are we going to the dining hall or the morning dew hall?" Emingzu gave it some thought and said, "The morning dew hall." In another palace in the palace, the girl held a pearl hair clip in each of her hands, turned her head, and asked, "Mother, do you think I look better wearing this pearl hair clip or this one?" The lady in palace attire walked over, sat down next to her, and asked, "Ning-er, you have your own clothes but you don't wear them. You have your own jewelry, but you wear mother's clothes. Why are you using mother's pearl hair clips?" "Because mother is the most beautiful." The girl mumbled and said, "I want to become as beautiful as mother, even more beautiful than before." Concubine Yen touched her hair and asked softly, "Ning-er, why do you want to become more beautiful?" "Because Sir is leaving." The girl's expression collapsed. She said reluctantly, "I want Sir to remember my most beautiful appearance." The woman hugged her in her arms and gently placed her chin on her forehead. Looking down at her, her gaze gradually became gentle as she whispered, "Our Ninger has grown up." The girl's beautiful eyes suddenly lit up. She raised her head and asked, "Really?" "Mother also thinks that I've grown up. When I grow up, I'll be able to get Brother Xian to issue an edict. Although you've grown up, you're still not old enough. You still need a few more years."
Concubine Yen lovingly touched her head and said, "Mother will help you dress up. I'll definitely make our Ning heir look beautiful." Not long after, the girl lifted the hem of her dress and spun around in front of a huge dressing mirror. She murmured in disbelief, "Imperial Mother, is this me?" Concubine Yen lovingly adjusted the position of the hair clip on her head and said, "Our Ning heir is growing more and more beautiful." She blushed and said, "I'm going to find teacher now. There's no hurry." Concubine Yen pulled her to sit down and pulled her into her arms. She said, "Ning heir, do you still remember what Mother said to you?" She thought for a moment and said, "Mother said that if you want to capture a man's heart, you have to capture a man's stomach first. This sentence is wrong. If a man likes you, no matter how bad your cooking is, he will still say that he likes you. Mother also said that if a man says he doesn't have it, then he really does. Mother also said." She counted with her fingers. She already understood some of what her mother said, but she still didn't fully understand some of it. She raised her head to look at her mother and asked, "Which sentence is Mother referring to?" Concubine Yen looked at her and asked, "Do you still remember what Mother said about the most important thing in a woman's life?" She thought for a moment and said, "Mother said that the most important thing in a woman's life is to find someone to rely on." Concubine Yen nodded and stroked her hair. She said, "Ning heir has grown up. In a few years it will be time for you to get married." She blushed and said, I'm not in a hurry. Ning heir, you have to remember that if you meet someone you like in the future, you have to boldly like him." Concubine Yan's expression suddenly became serious. She looked at her and said, "But sometimes, you have to let him remember you. It's not enough to let him see your most beautiful appearance. To let him remember you, you have to make him feel pain first. To let him remember you forever, you have to make him feel pain. To let him remember you, you have to make him feel pain first." She looked at her mother in confusion and asked, "What does that mean?" "Ning heir will know in the future." Concubine Yen touched her head and said, "Go." Li Yi had always felt that Mingzu was a loyal person. She had eaten the same taste of egg-fried rice from Jing He's first year to Jing He's 5th year and had never gotten tired of it. A loyal man was not easy to find, and a loyal woman was also rare. Li Yi was actually attracted by the way she focused on eating the egg-fried rice. When she raised her head to look at him, he looked away in embarrassment. She finished eating and put down her spoon. She looked at him and said, "Remember to explain to Xiaoning." Li Yi nodded and said, "I will explain it to her." Mingzu suddenly raised her head and looked at him. She asked, "Then how are you going to explain it to me?" Li Yi shook his head and said, "If I don't leave the capital, he won't be able to be stable as an emperor." Mingzu looked at him and said, "This is what you should explain to him. Without me, you can still handle these things very well." Li Yi shook his head and said, "The affairs of the country are important, but I hope that when everything settles down, you can think about yourself." "I have already thought about myself." Mingzu looked at him and said, "Remember what you said that day." Li Yi thought about it and asked, "That day when I was drunk, what did I say to you?" Mingzu shook her head and said, "When you come back I will tell you." "I will come back. Don't be too long." "It won't be too long." Li Yi turned to leave the Morning Dew Palace. His wrist was suddenly grabbed by her. "For me. Can't you stay?" She lowered her head and said in a low voice. Li Yi turned his head and was silent for a long time before he raised his hand and helped her remove a grain of rice from the corner of her mouth. He said, "Your identity is different now. In the future, when you eat egg-fried rice, don't lose your composure." She raised her head to look at Li Yi and shook her head. She said, "Before you come back, I won't eat egg-fried rice again." Walking out of the Morning Dew Palace, Li Yi's mood was somewhat heavy. Just as she could not leave with him, he could not stay either. He looked forward to the wider sky outside. This capital, to him, was no different than a cage. This should be the most correct choice. But it was not the best choice. It was not good for Mingzu, and it was not good for Xiaoning. Thinking of that pure girl without a trace of impurity, his heart felt somewhat stifled. There were some things that he did not want her to know. She would only think that this was just a simple trip. When they were tired and had enough, they would come back and everything would be the same as before. When Li Yi stopped in front of a certain palace, a clear voice came from behind him. "Sir." He turned his head and saw a girl standing there. A woman. She had a pearl flower in her hair. Unlike the playful style of a young girl in the past, She exuded a kind of grace and steadiness that had never been seen before.
She wore a palace dress. It was not the style of a young girl, but it was luxurious and dignified. Her face was lightly powdered, concealing what little remained of her inexperience. When Li Yi looked at her, he felt as if he had passed through time and was extremely unreal. She looked at the stunned Li Yi, and a faint smile appeared on her face. She spoke again. "Sir." Chapter 990. After a long time, Li Yi combined the image of the beautiful woman in front of him with that of Xiaofan.
He looked at her and said in disbelief, "You?
Why are you dressed like this?"
She picked up her dress and slowly turned it around in front of Li Yi. She said with some pride, "Mother dressed me up."
"Do I look good?" A young girl was a young girl. As soon as she opened her mouth, the mature image that she had just created in front of Li Yi immediately fell apart. Li Yi smiled and reached out to touch her head out of habit.
Seeing her current appearance, he took his hand back and nodded. "You look good."
Her big, bright eyes immediately curved into crescent moons. She lowered her head and walked forward while kicking her feet. She said, "Lady Mother said that in a few years, I will be able to get married. Now I have to learn how to dress myself up beautifully. I heard that the day a girl gets married is the day she looks the most beautiful." Li Yi had a little admiration for Yan Fei. She was born into a wealthy family and should have been very calm and upright, but she was not conservative at all. He didn't know how she usually educated the little girl. Sometimes the words that Xiaofan said were not what a little girl should say. Even he couldn't help but feel a little admiration when he heard it. This kind of characteristic was very rare in ancient women, especially in the imperial concubines. Li Yi didn't ask her why she dressed up like this. When girls were young, they all had the experience of stealing their mother's lipstick, wearing their mother's clothes, and wearing their mother's high heels. They all dreamed of growing up faster. Even some boys had this kind of experience. Xiaofan suddenly turned to look at Li Yi and said seriously, "Sir, when you are outside, you have to think of me often." Li Yi nodded and said, "I promise I will think of you once a day." "Twice."
"Okay, then twice." In the cold and desolate depths of the palace, two figures, one big and one small, were walking slowly. The girl was wearing adult clothes and had her head lowered as she walked. She was brimming with the aura of a young girl. As they chatted softly, there would be some pleasant laughter mixed in. In the Hall of Diligent Government, Li Xian put down the memorial and rubbed the space between his eyebrows. He looked down and asked, "What's the matter, Imperial Uncle?" A few days ago, when Li Yi was conferred the title of king, they were the ones who made the most noise. They were the elders of the Li family's imperial clan, so they couldn't be ignored like they were the court officials. Thus, when he saw these people, he felt a headache. The old man who had just walked into the hall bowed and said, "Your Majesty, we can't just let Jiang of Silla leave the capital." Li Xian knocked on the table and said with a frown, "Why can't you let Jiang of Silla leave the capital? What does Jiang of Silla's departure have to do with you?" "Your Majesty, don't forget that he knows the recipe for divine punishment." The old man bowed again and said in a loud voice, If he gives this secret recipe to the enemy country, our Jing kingdom will be in danger." Li Xian glared at him and said, "He's just going out to play. What are you talking about?" The old man looked at him and said, "Your Majesty, don't you understand? Jiang of Silla has moved his entire family out of the capital. It's obvious that he won't be able to come back." Li Xian was stunned, then looked at him and asked, "What did you say?" The old man looked into his eyes and panicked for no reason. "Your Majesty," Li Xian glared at him fiercely and said, "Repeat what you just said to us again." A moment later, a figure hurriedly walked out of the Hall of Diligent Government and walked quickly toward the Hall of Morning Dew. At the entrance of a palace somewhere, a girl waved at Li Yi and said, "Sir, I'll see you off tomorrow." Li Yi turned his head and waved at her, then bowed slightly to Concubine Yan and turned to leave. Concubine Yan patted her head and said, "Ning, go back." She smiled and turned her head back and said, "Mother, go back first. I'll secretly see you off for a while. Then go find my sister. I still need her to teach me martial arts." The Hall of Morning Dew. Li Xian looked at Emingzu who was drinking alone and asked in disbelief, "You already knew that he wouldn't come back, didn't you?" Emingzu didn't look at him and didn't say anything. Li Xian asked loudly, "He's not going out to play. He's hiding from us. Isn't that right?"
This guy, this guy.
An angry expression appeared on his face and he said sternly, I'll go find him.
Stop.
Mingzu suddenly stood up and shouted in a low voice.
Li Xian's footsteps stopped.
She raised her head to look at him and said slowly, Why are you going to find him?
Don't you think you've caused enough trouble? Do you want his efforts to go to waste?
Li Xian's expression changed.
Outside the door, a small figure stood there in a daze. Her face was pale and her body was trembling.
Her eyes were already filled with tears.
She was like a helpless fledgling or a little abandoned beast.
She turned her head and looked in the direction of the palace entrance with a confused and helpless gaze.
There was no one there. Her heart skipped a beat. She finally knew what she was going to lose.
She bit her lower lip to prevent her tears from falling.
She turned around and ran as fast as she could towards the palace entrance. Sir, don't you want me anymore?
Don't you want Xiaoning anymore? She finally could not hold it back.
Big drops of tears rolled down from her eyes.
She cried sadly and her voice was whimpering.
Sir, we've pinky hooks. You said you wouldn't leave me alone.
The eunuchs and palace maids in the palace watched as the little princess ran past them with a heartbroken expression.
They all panicked and hurriedly called for the palace guards. Even more people lifted up their clothes and chased after her.
When she ran to the palace entrance, her hair was already in a mess and she had lost one of her shoes.
Her delicate bare feet stepped on the ground. It was cold and painful, but she did not care about this. Because her husband was going to leave her.
The palace guards had already discovered her, but no one dared to stop her. Because she was Princess Xiaoning, the Princess Xiaoning who did not need to care about any palace rules. They did not dare to stop the princess who was crying and only cared about running. They could only send 2 groups of guards to follow behind her.
The leader of the guards anxiously said to his men, Quickly report to His Majesty, report to the princess. She ran quickly through the palace gate and came to the bustling street. Looking at the endless flow of people, she did not see the figure she wanted to see. She clenched her fists and weakly released them. She was like a puppet that had lost its soul. She stood on the street in a daze and then slowly squatted down. Her sobs turned into loud wails. Sir, you don't want me anymore. You don't want Xiaoning anymore. We've pinky hooks. We've clearly pinky hooks. You broke your promise first, you liar. She cried sadly and grieved. At first, they could still hear what she was saying, but later on, her voice became vague and unclear. The passers-by on the street looked at this scene in amazement. A girl dressed in luxurious clothes, obviously of extraordinary status, squatted on the ground and wailed. She cried and said something at the same time. 2 groups of armored guards with weapons in their hands surrounded her, not allowing anyone to get close. They did not know what had happened to the girl, but they could feel her sadness. Many of them could not bear to see her. The girl is crying so sadly. I wonder who is so heartless. What a beast! After an unknown period of time, a figure walked out from the crowd and waved his hand. The surrounding guards immediately opened up a path. Bad person, liar. The girl who was squatting on the ground suddenly felt someone pat her shoulder. She raised her head and through the blurry tears, she saw a familiar face. Li Yi stretched out his hand and wiped the tears off her face. He gently tapped her nose and said, If you continue to cry, you won't be pretty anymore. Then he carried her horizontally, passed through the row of guards, passed through the crowd, and slowly disappeared from everyone's sight. Chapter 991.
Feng could see that the son-in-law was in a bad mood when he came out of the imperial palace.
He did not take the carriage but chose to walk back. Although he did not show it on the surface, Feng could easily see this after being by his side for so many years.
It was not until the little girl ran out of the imperial palace and squatted on the street and wailed.
She cried her heart out and cried her lungs out.
Only then did he find the reason for the son-in-law's bad mood.
He looked up at the gray sky and shook his head. What a sin!
Li Yi held the girl horizontally in his arms.
Her head was buried in Li Yi's chest and she was still sobbing. Very quickly, his chest was soaked. Li Yi looked at her messy hair, bare feet, and messy clothes. He turned around and walked into a shop on the street. Your Highness! The girls in the shop hurriedly bowed.
Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Go get a basin of hot water and bring a new set of clothes and socks over." He carried the girl into the room and gently placed her on the bed.
She was no longer crying. She lowered her head and turned around, no longer looking at him. Li Yi sat down next to her and softly asked, "Are you still angry at me?" She shook her head and sniffed. "I am not angry at teacher. I just don't want teacher to see me cry."
"I must be very ugly right now." Li Yi shook his head and said, "Our shining is always the most beautiful no matter what."
She raised her head.
Her eyes were red and swollen and the tears had not yet dried.
She looked at Li Yi and softly asked, "Teacher, are you really going to abandon shining?"
Li Yi looked at her red and swollen eyes. In his mind, her helpless and heartbroken appearance appeared. He shook his head and said, "Teacher will not abandon you."
"Your Highness, the water is here." One of the girls fetched some water, while the other girl brought some clean clothes, shoes, and socks and placed them beside the bed. Li Yi wet the towel and wrung it dry, carefully wiping her little face. The girl's delicate little face was soft and elastic, and after washing off the light makeup, it returned to a delicate and jade-like appearance.
Then, he carried her to the bedside, soaked her dirty little feet in the water, and gently rubbed them.
There were still tears in her eyes, but she couldn't help giggling.
She quickly said, "Sir, it's ticklish."
"Bear with it. It'll be over in a while." Li Yi helped her wash the dust off her feet and wiped her feet clean.
He pointed at her tear-soaked clothes and pointed at the new clothes by the bed and said, "Put on the new clothes first."
Then he turned around and walked out of the room, closing the door behind him. A few girls were guarding outside the door. When they saw him, they immediately saluted. "You don't have to be so polite in the future." Most of these girls were from the brothels.
Li Yi waved his hand and asked, "Is everything ready?"
One of the girls nodded and said with a smile, "Everything is ready. We can leave tomorrow." Later today, there will be new sisters coming to take over. This time, leaving the capital was not a simple family trip. In addition to his family, he had to take many people with him, including most of the top management of the brothels and shops. The place they were going to was at the border of the three countries.
In the future, no matter which side or the three countries developed together, they would need a lot of manpower.
The road was long, and if he wanted to become the man of the mountain bandit king, he had to deal with all kinds of accidents in the future. In addition to enough manpower and powerful strength, he also had to have enough money. Although the Li family was rich, it was not a bad thing to have more money. This time, the people accompanying him would be the backbone of building a new business empire. In addition, the Lu Meng would move as a whole. In the future, the center of the martial arts world would also move from the capital to the west. Although this was only the first batch, there were more than 1,000 people. At a certain moment, the door opened and a girl walked out. She had removed all the makeup on her face and changed into a new set of clothes. Other than her messy hair and red and swollen eyes, she had returned to her original appearance. Li Yi looked at her hair and shook his head. He took her hand and walked back to the room. He sat her in front of the dressing table and picked up a comb to help her comb her hair. She sat there obediently and looked at the figure standing behind her through the mirror. He was focused on helping her with her makeup. His expression was so focused, and his eyes were so serious. It made her heart gradually calm down. Li Yi spent a full quarter of an hour before he managed to do her favorite flying immortal hair bun.
She suddenly said, "Sir."
"Yes." Li Yi was focused on combing her hair and softly said, "Yes."
"Sir."
"Yes."
"Sir." Li Yi looked at her in surprise and asked, "What's wrong?"
She smiled and said, "Nothing. Sir is about to leave. I wanted to call you a few more times. In the future I won't be able to." Li Yi lowered his head to look at her and softly said, "If you say you want to leave, Sir will take you with him." She raised her head and looked into Li Yi's eyes. She saw tenderness and love in his eyes. Her mother looked at her like this, and her sister looked at her like this. Sir liked her, just like her mother liked her, and also like her sister liked her. But she knew that the way she looked at Sir would not be like this. At this moment, she suddenly understood some of what her mother said. She also understood that Sir only thought of her as a child, but she was no longer a child. She shook her head and looked at Li Yi. She smiled and said, "I won't leave. After father leaves, only mother will be left. If I also leave,
Mother will be very lonely, very lonely. I want to stay here with her. Li Yi combed the hair on her temples. Although her face was full of smiles, he suddenly felt a bit of heartache. I know that Sir will definitely come back. We made a pinky promise. She stood up and put her hands behind her back. She stood on her tiptoes and looked at Li Yi. She sweetly said, "In the future, I will listen to Mother in the palace. I will eat well, sleep well, and do my homework well. I will grow up well and wait for Sir to come back." Li Yi looked at her in a daze. When she wore the clothes of an adult, wore the jewelry of an adult, and had her hair combed like an adult. When she said that she had grown up, Li Yi felt that she was a child. Now, she wore the clothes of a young girl without any makeup. Her face was brimming with the smile of a young girl. She used the tone of a young girl to tell him that she would eat well, sleep well, and grow up well. When he came back, the girl in his memory had already disappeared from his eyes. She no longer said that she had grown up. She had already grown up. The young girl had grown up in an instant, and the smile on her face was as bright as a mountain flower. Li Yi's face was pale. His heart seemed to be tightly gripped by someone, and the pain pierced through his heart. Chapter 992. When he held Shanning's hand again and walked out of the room, Li Xian and Emingzu were already waiting outside the door. Emingzu looked at Shanning with a worried expression. Li Xian walked over and was about to speak when Li Yi looked at them and said, "Let's talk when we get back." In the Li family. Because Shanning's eyes were swollen like peaches, Rui and Third Miss Chen looked at him with reproach. Mississippi Lu looked at him with slight disdain. It was shameful for him to bully a child because he couldn't beat her. Li Yi naturally couldn't explain anything. On the contrary, Shanning kept smiling and saying that she was fine. They held her hand and asked her all kinds of questions. In the room, Li Yi and Li Xian sat opposite each other. They didn't look at each other. "Why didn't you tell me?" Li Xian drank a cup of tea and put it on the table fiercely. He gritted his teeth and said, "Am I so scary that you moved your whole family out of the capital?" "You're not scary." Li Yi shook his head and said, "You're just stupid." Li Xian suddenly hit the table and said angrily, "How dare you scold me? What's wrong with scolding you?" Li Yi looked at him and said in an unfriendly tone, "Try hitting the table again. Do you believe that I won't hit you?" Li Xian didn't dare to try because he knew that Li Yi really dared to hit him. Most importantly, he couldn't beat him. He leaned against the chair with some frustration and said, "I didn't think it through. I didn't discuss it with you in advance. Is there no way to make it up? Do you have to leave?" Li Yi shook his head and said, "No." Li Xian looked at him and said anxiously, "Are you just going to leave this mess to me and Emingzu?" "First of all, this is not a mess. Right now, the seas are clear and the rivers are peaceful, the court is bright, and the Jing kingdom is developing vigorously. Based on the current situation, it will still develop vigorously for many more years." Li Yi looked at him and shook his head. "Second of all, although we are both surnamed Li, this world belongs to the Li family, not the Li family. I don't owe the royal family anything. Do you want me to waste my life in Jingdo and work for the royal family for the rest of my life? You don't owe us the royal family? How do you have the cheek to say that?" Li Xian stared at him angrily and said, "You left and took away the people of Yongning and Mingzhu's heart, and now you want to take away Shanning. The three most important princesses of the royal family have been taken away by you. You dare say you don't owe us the royal family?" Li Yi suddenly did not know how to refute. He thought for a long time and said, "I've already repaid what I owed the royal family. I gave the royal family a prosperous and stable time. It's not too much to abduct three princesses, right?" Li Xian looked at him and said seriously, "We have known each other for so long. Can you? Even if it's just once, can you have a little bit of face?" Li Yi narrowed his eyes and looked at him. "Let me tell you, although we are very familiar with each other, although you are the emperor, if you continue to make personal attacks like this, I will still hit you." Li Xian looked at him and shook his head. "Touch your conscience. Can you still say what you just said?" Li Yi put his hand on his chest and said, "Even if I touch my conscience, I will still take Yongning with me. If Shanning wants to leave, I will still take her with me. Emingzu. Emingzu, wait for me to come back." "What about me?" Li Xian looked at him and said expectantly, "Why don't you take me with you as well?" Li Yi. He could take away the princesses, but taking away the emperor, Li Yi didn't plan to do so for now.
3 requests.
Li Xian looked at him and said, "I have 3 requests. First, every month. At least write a letter to me every month. Don't be half-hearted.
Each letter must have at least 5,000 words. Don't make up the number of words. Second, Shuzhou. I will give Shuzhou to you.
You are the Jiang of Silla, so a prince should have a fief.
That place is your fief. I will transfer the provincial governor of Shuzhou back. From now on, all the affairs of Shuzhou will be handed over to you. You can do whatever you want. But you must remember, you are the Jiang of Silla. You are the Jiang of Silla of the Jing Kingdom. You have the kingdom and me behind you. Whenever I want to find you, I can find you in Shuzhou. Third, if you encounter anything interesting, don't forget me. Only these 3 requests."
Li Xian looked at him and said, "As long as you agree to my 3 requests, you can take away Yongning Shaoning, and if Mingzu is willing, you can even take her with you."
Li Yi looked at him and thought for a while.
Then he nodded and said, "I promise you."
Li Xian shook his head and said, "Words are no proof."
Li Yi raised 3 fingers and said, "I swear.
I'd rather believe that there are ghosts in the world than believe a man's mouth. I don't believe your oath." Li Xian shook his head firmly and took out a piece of paper from his bosom. He also took out the ink and said, "These are the 3 requests I just wrote. You can sign them." Li Yi took it and looked at it. He didn't expect Li Xian to be smart this time.
He looked at him and asked, "Can I not sign them?
Can you trust me for once?"
Li Xian shook his head even more firmly.
Li Yi picked up the pen and used his thumb to press on the ink. If he wanted to sign them, then sign them. Once he left the capital, he would be like a fish swimming in the sea and a bird flying in the sky. How could a man be bound by a piece of paper? Do you think that a man can't be bound by a piece of paper?
Li Xian put away the paper that he had signed and said, "If you violate any of these, I will have the local authorities put up notices like, Jiang of Silla Li Yi is a bastard who doesn't keep his word everywhere in the Jing Kingdom. I want all the people to know what happens to people who don't keep their word. We're all friends. There's no need to be so cruel, is there? There's no use to you."
Li Xian looked at him, stood up, and strode out of the room. In the courtyard, Shaoning was surrounded by women.
Third Miss Chen looked at her red and swollen eyes and said with some heartache, "I'll go get 2 eggs and put them on." Yongning held her hand and comforted her in a low voice. "Don't cry, royal sister. I'll beg brother to take you with him." Shaoning hugged her and said, "In the future when I'm not by your side, you have to be good and remember to eat on time.
Don't eat too much sweets, or else you'll have toothaches.
You have to get used to sleeping alone." Yongning nodded obediently and said, "Royal sister, I know. I'll be good." Li Duan ran around the courtyard alone.
Shaoning walked over and picked him up.
She whispered, "Duaner, we're going to leave soon. You have to grow up quickly. The next time we meet, I'll bring you to play a lot of fun things. Xiaonyang play." Li Duan looked at her and grinned. "You're tuning in to the Xiaofan's Wuxia Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.